Germany of Iron and Blood. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 476, Taking Advantage of the Fire to Rob. Early the next morning, US Secretary of State Bryan and Secretary of the Navy Daniels met with Churchill again. Churchill looked terrible, with messy hair and red eyes, as if he hadn't slept at all last night. Your Excellency, did you rest well last night? Bryan asked with concern. Your Excellency, Secretary of State, how can I sleep until I get your reply? The current situation is becoming more and more unfavorable to the British Empire. If the warship cannot be purchased from your country as soon as possible, the situation will deteriorate further. Churchill looked anxious. Minister, then, I would like to congratulate you now. I have brought you good news. Your Excellency has agreed in principle to sell the capital ships we are currently serving to your country. Bryan said. What? Is this true? This is really great. Churchill suddenly looked ecstatic. Although, he has always believed that the Americans are unlikely to refuse their demands. However, the Americans agreed overnight, which still made he is very happy. If the handover of warships on the American side goes smoothly, then, a month later, they can once again organize a huge fleet to fight a decisive battle with the German Navy. At that time, it is still unclear who will win the battle. Yes, Your Excellency, we can sell these capital ships to your country. However, since these capital ships are an important force of the US Navy, after selling them to your country, our naval strength will directly drop to the lowest point. Therefore, the cost of capital ships is not cheap. In addition, your country should also need a batch of armored cruisers, light cruisers and destroyers. The Republic of America can also sell them to your country. Bryan continued. Churchill nodded. He knew that the Americans would not let go of such a good opportunity. To bring those 12 battleships back to the UK, they had to be prepared to bleed heavily. Your Excellency, Secretary of State, in addition to the 12 capital ships, we also need to purchase 6 armored cruisers, 20 light cruisers and 50 destroyers from your country. Churchill said. Well, this would be the best. The specific price will be discussed by Minister Daniels with you. After Secretary Bryan finished speaking, he immediately fell silent. Churchill looked at US Secretary of the Navy Daniels. Your Excellency, after deliberation, we believe that the price of each battleship is $80 million. The price of each armored cruiser is $40 million. The price of each light cruiser is $20 million. And the price of each destroyer is $20 million. $5 million. Minister Daniels said a series of prices. After hearing these prices, Churchill couldn't help but widen his eyes. He had expected for a long time that the Americans would open their mouths, but he did not expect that the offer they made would be so outrageous. You know, the exchange rate between the US dollar and the pound is 5 to 1. That is to say, a battleship worth $80 million is equivalent to 16 million pounds. This price is definitely a sky-high price. You know, even the Queen Elizabeth class battleships of the British Navy cost only £2 million each. The Americans directly offered a price 8 times that of the Queen Elizabeth class battleship. This is simply slaughtering the UK as a fat sheep. Your Excellency, did I hear you right? Are the prices proposed by your country too outrageous? Churchill said. No, Your Excellency, the price is not outrageous at all. After all, the United States of America sold these battleships to your country, which took a very big risk. If the Germans declare war on us, it will be troublesome. So, we need to prepare early. Minister Daniels said. The Germans will never declare war on you, because you sold us warships. Churchill said. That's not certain. Minister Daniels refused to budge. Well, Your Excellency, the price is too high for the British Empire to accept. Churchill said. Your Excellency, if this price is unacceptable to your country, then we can only express regret. Bryan said. Obviously, the Americans are now convinced that the British have no other way but to buy warships from them. Therefore, they don't have to worry about whether the British will not buy it. In that case, their plan to fight back against the Germans can only be aborted. In this war, the British will never have a chance to come back. Your Excellency, Secretary of State, your country sells warships to us, which is of great benefit to both of us. If your country's asking prices too high, so that we cannot buy these warships, it will only let the Germans take advantage of it. Churchill said, Your Excellency, this has nothing to do with us. The United States is a neutral country, and it is impossible for Germany to go to war against us. Even if they have this intention, they don't have the ability. The American Republic can defeat all threats. Minister Daniels said. Churchill was very speechless. The Americans clearly decided to eat them, so they wanted to take advantage of the fire. He wanted to refuse, but he knew that, if he refused the Americans, everything would be over. After thinking about it, Churchill knew he had no choice but to swallow his breath. He vowed that after Britain survives this crisis, it will definitely make Americans look good. Of course, this does not mean that Churchill will directly agree with the price offered by the United States. This is like doing business, and it is also necessary to bargain. When Churchill and Daniels were bargaining, they started to compete on prices like vendors in a vegetable market. It's just that Britain is really at a disadvantage. Even if Churchill tried his best, he couldn't keep the price down. After Daniels backed down to the final bottom line, that is, the price of a battleship is $50 million, the price of an armored cruiser is $20 million, the price of a light cruiser is $10 million, and the price of a destroyer is $3 million. Don't give it any more. Seeing this situation, Churchill had to accept the price. After all, if you don't accept it, then the deal will collapse. When Churchill nodded, there was a hint of surprise in the eyes of Bryan and Daniels. Even if the economic situation of the United States is very good, the funds obtained from the sale of these warships are undoubtedly a huge sum of money for them. According to the price they reached, the British will pay $1.17 billion for the purchase of 12 battleships, 6 armored cruisers, 20 light cruisers and destroyers, which is equivalent to £214 million, 1.35 billion marks. Chapter 477, Colonies for Warships. $1.07 billion in 1915. This is definitely an astronomical figure. Even, this is more than the military expenditure of the United States for a year. If the US Navy obtains this funding, it will be able to build at least 40 new capital ships, making the US Navy a powerful force that can rival the German Navy in an instant. If you add the US government's investment in the Navy, it is no problem to surpass the German Navy. Minister Daniels is very satisfied when he thinks that with such a huge sum of money in hand, the US Navy will usher in explosive growth. As the Minister of the Navy, he certainly hopes that the US Navy will be as strong as possible, and it is best to surpass Germany and become the new maritime hegemony. Although, he knew it was very difficult, very not easy. But he believes that as long as there is enough financial support, everything will be very easy to achieve. By the way, Your Excellency, the Republic of America hopes to obtain your country's 381mm main gun technology and a full set of steam turbine technology. Minister Daniels continued. These two most critical technologies are also what the US Navy is determined to win. Churchill was taken aback and said casually, "Of course there is no problem." However, the British Empire spent a lot of manpower and material resources to develop these two technologies. If the American Republic needs it, we can offer it to you at a preferential price transfer. Although these two technologies are advanced British technologies, they are absolutely not allowed to flow unless it is abroad absolutely necessary. However, the current situation is critical, and I can't care so much anymore. In addition, Churchill also hoped to use these two technologies to make a big hit from the Americans. That way, you might be able to save some money. After all, more than $1 billion is simply a huge sum of money that the United Kingdom cannot afford. However, Churchill soon knew that he underestimated the shamelessness of these Americans. Americans simply want to take these two British technologies for nothing, without paying a penny. Cough. Your Excellency, you misunderstood. The American Republic hopes that the British Empire can transfer these two technologies to the American Republic for free, as a little compensation for the American Republic's huge risk. Minister Daniels said. Churchill blushed. He never thought that these Americans suddenly would be so shameless. He even wanted to get up and give the other party a slap immediately. It was clear that the Americans were taking advantage of them and robbing them. However, he had no choice but to suppress his anger, and he couldn't make a big deal out of small things. Minister, the American Republic took the risk of offending the Germans to support the British Empire. The British Empire will not be so stingy that they are unwilling to transfer to technologies? Brian asked. Churchill twitched the corners of his mouth in distress. Those are the two most critical skills. However, since the Americans have said so, can he still refuse? Well, for the friendship of the British Empire and the American Republic, we promise to transfer these two technologies to your country. Churchill pretended to be nonchalant, even though his heart was bleeding. Very good, Your Excellency. I believe that the friendship between us two countries can continue. Brian. However, Your Excellency Secretary of State, the British Empire simply doesn't have that much money to pay for this purchase of ships, so we hope to be able to borrow from the United States and use loans to pay for it. Churchill said. What? Loan? Brian and Daniels suddenly turned ugly. They don't want to continue to provide loans to the British. Although they have provided a lot of loans to the British before, judging from the current battle situation, the possibility of the British winning is very small. If they continue to provide loans to them, it will be like a meat bun beating a dog. Go without return. Americans would not do such a cheap business. Your Excellency, let's forget about the loan. The funds of the American Republic are not abundant. Brian smiled. Your Excellency, your country can use other equivalent items to pay, such as gold or other precious metals, etc. Minister Daniels said. Churchill hesitated for a moment, and then said, since the United States cannot provide us with loans, then we have only one way. The British Empire hopes to repay the purchase of ships by transferring colonies to your country. Transfer the colony? Brian and Daniel were stunned for a moment. The United States has always coveted the vast colonies of the British Empire. If possible, they would like to personally defeat the British Empire and all the colonies of the British Empire. However, after comparing the military strength of the two sides, the Americans had no choice but to give up this unrealistic fantasy and could only watch with envy that the Germans were about to defeat the British and take away those colonies. Now, the British are actually willing to transfer the colony to them in order to repay the construction money, which is an acceptable solution for the United States. After all, the United States does not lack funds and the like, and they value colonies more. Your Excellency, if it is a colony, then your country intends to transfer those colonies to us. After all, $1.07 billion is a huge sum of money. If it is a colony with poor conditions, the United States does not need it. Brian said. Britain's colonies are mostly good places, but there are also a few that are not so good. Your Excellency, Secretary of State, if your country agrees, we can transfer the two colonies of the Bahamas and Jamaica to you to offset the purchase of the ship. Churchill said. Brian shook his head immediately. Your Excellency, the two colonies of Bahamas and Jamaica are not big, and they are not worth so much money. Churchill thought for a while, and then said, we can add Grenada. The price of these three colonies is enough to offset the purchase of the ship. These three colonies are all islands in the Caribbean Sea, and their geographical location is very important. Especially for the United States. If they have these colonies, they can further expand their power to South America. If Germany defeated Britain and occupied these colonies, it would directly threaten the continental United States. However, if these three colonies are sold for $1.07 billion, this is also a sky-high price. After all, when the British seized these colonies, they did not spend much effort at all. Chapter 478, Secret Deal. Bahamas, Jamaica, and Grenada. These three colonies are only a very small part of the huge overseas colonies of the British Empire. Even, it can only be regarded as some corners and corners. Compared with a core colony like India, it is nothing at all. Churchill believed that, if the Americans could agree to exchange these three colonies for those warships, there would be no opposition in Britain. Minister Brian and Daniels, after thinking about it, said to Churchill, Minister, I need to report to the President. Such a major matter needs to be decided by the President. Churchill nodded. I can understand, because I also need to report to the country. However, I believe that, as long as both of us are sincere, everything will be fine. Okay, Your Excellency, may we have a happy cooperation, Brian said. Though, Brian would love to get more colonies from the British, or better yet, but he knew that, although Britain was in crisis, they were not so easy to surrender. You know, they have always cherished those colonies very much. Now, the British have actually agreed to take out the colonies in exchange for warships, which is already a great improvement. After Minister Brian and Daniels left the hotel, they rushed to the White House to report the results of the negotiations to President Woodrow Wilson. President Woodrow Wilson was very satisfied with being able to sell those warships for a high price of $1,070 million. This is undoubtedly a huge sum of money for the Republic of America. However, President Woodrow Wilson was a little dissatisfied with the British payment method, which was replaced by colonies. After all, although the locations of the Bahamas, Jamaica, and Grenada given by the British are very good, the area is too small. I agree in principle with the British exchange of colonies for those warships. However, it is not enough to exchange the Bahamas, Jamaica, and Grenada for our many warships. Tell the British that it is best to send the special Trinidad and Tobago, and Antigua and Barbuda are also on board, said President Woodrow Wilson. In this case, the United States is equivalent to taking all the British colonies in the Caribbean Sea into its pocket. This also allows the United States to occupy a great advantage in the Caribbean Sea. It can even use these islands in the Caribbean Sea as a springboard to further expand to South America. Your Excellency, the British will probably not agree to adding 2 more colonies. Brian frowned. The British are asking us now. Even if they are dissatisfied, they should not refuse our request. After all, apart from us being able to help them, there is no other country in the world that can provide them with such. What's more, if they lose the war, all these colonies will be owned by the Germans. That will be a huge threat to the American Republic, and we must try our best to avoid such a situation from happening, said President Woodrow Wilson. Yes, Mr. President. Once the Germans have these colonies, it will be very bad for us. However, Mr. President, I think we can adopt some strategies, such as making an agreement with the British. If they can defeat Germany in the war, people, then we will return Trinidad and Tobago and Antigua and Barbuda to them. If they are defeated by the Germans, then these 2 colonies will naturally belong to us. Daniels suggested the minister. This is a very good way, Your Excellency. Even if the British bought warships from us and joined forces with the French and Italian fleets, it would undoubtedly be very difficult to defeat the Germans. Therefore, the 2 in the colony, it must belong to us in the end, Brian said. President Woodrow Wilson nodded. Well, let's do this. At the same time, Churchill was also in contact with the country. To buy warships from the United States at such an expensive price, he must obtain domestic approval. Besides, such a major event as the transfer of colonies must be authorized by the country. Otherwise, he would not be able to succeed at all. Prime Minister Asquith was also very angry when he learned that the Americans had actually offered such a sky-high price of $1,070 million US. The Americans clearly regarded them as fat sheep and slaughtered them fiercely. At such a price, if Britain built its own warships, it would be enough to build a more powerful Royal Navy. But Prime Minister Asquith also knows that it is Britain who is begging the United States to buy those warships, not the United States insisting on selling them to them. Therefore, no matter how harsh the conditions of the Americans are, they can only agree. Otherwise, there would be no way for Churchill's plan to continue to be implemented. That undoubtedly means that Britain has completely lost the war, and there is no chance of a comeback. At that time, Britain will lose a complete defeat, and not only everything they have will be taken away by the Germans. As for the exchange of colonies for those warships, Prime Minister Asquith agreed. Most of the senior officials in the British cabinet did not object. After all, although colonies are very important to Britain, ensuring Britain's victory in the war is the most important thing. If they lose the war, they will pay a greater price for it. So, after venting his anger, Prime Minister Asquith still instructed Churchill to agree to the terms of the Americans. However, Churchill was also very dissatisfied after learning that the Americans had made new demands. However, the Americans were very firm, and he had no choice but to accept the conditions of the Americans. After consulting the country point subsequently, the United Kingdom made a secret agreement with the United States. The British used the colonies of Bahamas, Jamaica, Grenada, Trinidad and Tobago, and Antigua and Barbuda for $1,070 million US, 12 battleships, 5 battle cruisers, 20 light cruisers and 50 destroyers were purchased from the United States. At the same time, Britain will also transfer 381mm main gun technology and new steam turbine technology to the United States. These warships will be transported by the United Kingdom from within the country to transport a group of naval sailors, plus the sailors they recruited from Canada, to drive back to the United Kingdom. The US government will keep the deal secret until the British bring the fleet home. Of course, in order not to leak the news, the United States required the British to drive these warships away within 1 month. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 479, French Determination. Paris has always been known as the capital of romance. Those exquisite and elegant buildings, as well as the scenery on both sides of the Seine River, have always been places where people linger and forget to return. The French love romance, as the whole world knows. It's just that this also makes the combat effectiveness of the French army have always been poor. Except that during the Napoleonic Empire era, the French army was invincible across Europe. The rest of the time, the performance of the French army was very bad. During the Franco-Prussian War, it was even beaten by the Prussians, and begged for mercy. Even the emperor was captured up. In this World War, the performance of the French army was also not very good. After the war broke out, the reorganization of the French army had not yet been completed. As a last resort, the unreorganized troops had to be sent to the battlefield to resist the German attack. Coupled with strategic mistakes, the French army suffered heavy casualties in the early stages of the war. If it weren't for the timely reinforcement of the British Expeditionary Force, and the German army's strategy also had problems, perhaps France had already failed in this war. Even now, the German army has advanced to the Marne River, which is only a few tens of kilometers away from Paris. This is undoubtedly a fatal threat to Paris. If the German army made another breakthrough, it might push the front line directly to the city of Paris. At that time, this beautiful city will be destroyed in the flames of war. The current situation is also very unfavorable for France. The Russian ally they depended on collapsed directly, and the newly established Cloth Party Russia even made peace with the Germans and directly withdrew from the war. The whole of Russia is now a mess, and it is completely impossible to expect them to keep the Germans in check. This made France have to bear the strong pressure brought by Germany alone. Although, the British Expeditionary Force sent to France has increased to millions. The total size of the French army has also mobilized to more than 2 million. However, the French generals have no idea whether they can withstand the German attack. It's just that the British are obviously unreliable. The Royal Navy, which was once the number one in the world, was actually defeated by the German Navy, and all the main forces were wiped out. It seems that it is only one step away from being defeated. This made people in France panic even more. Some senior officials of the French government even began to declare that it was impossible to win this war. If they wanted to keep more interests of France, they could only make peace with Germany. Of course, this is not the mainstream view. Most of the senior French officials and army generals still want to continue to resist. After all, they know very well that with the greedy character of the Germans, if they make peace with Germany, they will inevitably be severely slaughtered by the Germans. This is undoubtedly unacceptable for France. What's more, they still have so many troops now, so they want to fight again. When the British Secretary of the Navy Churchill went to the United States to discuss the purchase of warships, the British Foreign Office also contacted France, hoping that the French Navy could fully support the British Navy and then fight a decisive battle with the German Navy. However, the French side did not immediately agree to this. Before the rise of Germany, France was also regarded as a maritime power second only to Britain. especially during the period of King Louis XIV and the Napoleon Empire. It once competed with Britain for maritime supremacy. Of course, in the end they failed. Coupled with Germany's threat to France, France can only shift its focus to the construction of the army. But even so, France still retains a navy among the top 5 in the world. Because France also has vast colonies overseas, the safety of those colonies is also very important to France. Gentlemen, the UK has made a formal request to us and hopes to get the cooperation of our navy to defeat the German navy and reverse the situation of the war. Do you think we should do? Should we agree to the British request? French President asked Raymond Poincaré. Your Excellency, I think we should cooperate with Britain. Now, we are allies. In the war against the Germans, we must cooperate closely. Only in this way can we defeat the Germans and win the war. Prime Minister René Viviani made his statement first. Yes, Your Excellency. I also agree to cooperate with the British Royal Navy to find a way to defeat the Germans. Although, the Royal Navy has already failed once, and the loss is very large. But if, as they say, it can be bought from the Americans with a batch of warships, plus our capital ships and the Italians, we are fully capable of another decisive battle with Germany. If we can win this time, then our disadvantaged situation will be greatly improved. Navy Secretary Victor Gagnon said. Will the Americans sell warships to the British? Even if we and the Italians are added, it will be very difficult to defeat the Germans. Minister of War Alexander Millerand was a little worried. It is true that the Germans are too powerful. So, I'm also worried about this. Foreign Minister Théophile Delcasse said, no matter how great the chance of winning is, we always have to try. Otherwise, we can only sit back and watch the Germans' advantages continue to expand and eventually lose this war. Prime Minister René Viviani said, yes, I fully agree with the Prime Minister's views. The French Republic has reached the most critical moment, and we must do our best. Otherwise, we will fail in the end. President Raymond Poincaré said, now France, although the combat effectiveness of the troops is not strong, however, their determination to fight was undoubtedly strong. The French know that, if they don't work hard, they will have to taste the consequences of the failure of the Franco-Prussian War again. Even, the requirements of the Germans this time will be more stringent than those after their failure in the Franco-Prussian War. With the full support of the President and the Prime Minister, other French cabinet ministers naturally have no other opinions. Immediately, French President Raymond Poincaré signed an order agreeing to form a coalition with the British Navy to fight a decisive battle with the German Navy. This time, the French Navy will send all 10 capital ships, as well as 15 light cruisers and 30 destroyers, to join the coalition forces. You know, this has already mobilized all the main forces of the French Navy. If it fails again this time, the French Navy will never recover from it. Chapter 480, Victory is in sight. After the German Navy won the decisive naval battle with the Royal Navy, the whole of Germany cheered. They were not only happy for the victory of the German Empire, but also cheered for the war that was about to end. In the eyes of most Germans, the war should be won soon, because the German army really had too much of an advantage in this war. The German army has already achieved victory on the Eastern Front. Russia has been defeated, and now the Burundian party has signed an armistice treaty with Germany, allowed Germany to achieve extremely fruitful results. Now, the German Navy has defeated the British Navy. So, apart from the British and French coalition forces deployed in northern France, what other forces did the Allies have to fight Germany? Even if the total strength of the British and French coalition forces has increased to nearly 3 million people. But the German people are still full of confidence in the German army. They believed that the German army would surely win. As for another big country in the Allied powers, the Kingdom of Italy, that betrayed the Allied powers, no one cared at all. After the Italians joined the war, they did nothing but launch a few rounds of offensives in the southern part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. In other words, it was because they suffered heavy losses in the offensive that the Italians did not dare to act rashly. Especially after the Eastern Front was over, the army of the Austro-Hungarian Empire was able to return to the country, which directly posed a fatal threat to the Kingdom of Italy. While strengthening the defense line in the north, the Italians asked Britain and France for help, hoping that Britain and France could send troops to reinforce them. It's a pity that Britain and France are now unable to protect themselves, so naturally they have no power to reinforce them. The German General Staff, the generals of the German army, plus Wilhelm II and Qin Tian, all gathered here. After the German Navy has achieved a decisive victory in the naval battle, all eyes are on the German army. As long as the German army can also defeat the British and French allied forces in the next battle, then Germany will win this battle. King Wilhelm II is in a very good mood at the moment. After half a year of preparation, the troops deployed by the German army on the Western Front are already strong. Although, the strength of the British and French coalition forces is also getting stronger and stronger. However, William II believed that with the strength of the German army, it would definitely be able to defeat the British and French allied forces. When the German army defeated the British and French allied forces, then the final victory would naturally belong to the German Empire. At that time, the German Empire will replace the British Empire as the world hegemony. The whole of Europe and the whole world will prostrate at the feet of the German Empire. And he will also become the greatest emperor in the world. Thinking of this, William II was very excited. Everyone, it has been more than half a year since the war started. In the past half a year, the empire has achieved one brilliant victory after another. Now, the empire is not far from winning the final victory. I hope we can defeat the Anglo-French coalition forces in France on the Western Front. In this case, our enemy will only have one British person left, William II said. As for the Kingdom of Italy, it was also not taken seriously by William II. In William II's view, the Italians could not even defeat the Austro-Hungarian Empire, let alone the German Empire. At that time, Germany only needs to send a small amount of troops to assist the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and it will be able to completely defeat the Kingdom of Italy. Everything will be very easy. Yes, Your Majesty. The generals of the Imperial Army replied excitedly. They were also greatly stimulated by the victory of the Imperial Navy. In comparison, the performance of the Imperial Army on the Western Front last year was not so satisfactory. Of course, William II blamed all the responsibility on Little Maoki. These generals naturally believed that the culprit for their failure to win on the Western Front was Maoki. Although, the reasons for the German army's failure on the Western Front last year were manifold. But now no one cares. Now that Maoki has already taken the blame, naturally no one cares anymore. According to the information we have received, the expeditionary force sent by the British to France has already exceeded 1 million people. The French army also has more than 2 million people. This time we only deployed 8 legions on the Western Front. A total of 1.8 million people defeat the British and French allied forces in one fell swoop. William II asked. Although, the combat effectiveness of the German army ranks first in the world. However, after experiencing the tempering of the battlefield, the gap between the British army, the French army and the German army is actually not that big. With the German army at a serious disadvantage in terms of strength, William II was really worried. Your Majesty, although the Anglo-French coalition forces have an advantage in terms of military strength, wars cannot be won with a large number of people. Our 8th Army was the best when it wiped out 2 million Russian troops on the Eastern Front last year. Example. War Minister-in-Chief of the General Staff von Falkenhayn said with a smile. The other generals also laughed. Indeed, the victory of the 8th Army of the German Army on the Eastern Front last year was shocked everyone. With less than 200,000 troops, the Russian army of 2 million troops was defeated. Such a victory is absolutely impossible for any one person. Even if the combat effectiveness of the Russian army is very bad, even if it is bad, it will not be like this. Of course, the generals were full of envy and admiration for Qin Tian, who commanded the 8th Army. This also made Qin Tian, in addition to the halo of the Imperial Prince, have another halo of proficiency in military affairs. It can be said that now Qin Tian's position in the empire has been completely stabilized. Except for William II, no one is higher than him. As for Qin Tian's succession to the throne, it was even more secure. Even if Crown Prince William came to his senses, he would definitely not be able to compete with Qin Tian for the succession to the throne. After all, the Imperial Navy has been completely controlled by Qin Tian. The 8th Army of the Imperial Army, as well as the newly formed 9th and 10th Army, are all controlled by Qin Tian's people. Qin Tian can also influence quite a few of the other 7 legions. Qin Tian, who has mastered the military power, even William II, may not be able to forcibly depose him. Even William II has fully realized Qin Tian's ability. If he were to choose who would inherit the empire again, he would probably choose Qin Tian instead of Crown Prince William without hesitation. Chapter 481, Frontline Commander. From William II to the generals of the Imperial Army, and then to the ordinary soldiers of the Imperial Army, they are all full of confidence in the upcoming Western Front war. After careful preparation, the strength of each legion on the Western Front has been further strengthened. Not only have artillery and automatic weapons been greatly increased, but each legion has formed an armored division, making the number of tanks assembled by the German army on the Western Front more than 2,000. Even if the British and French allied forces built a strong defense line on the Marne River, it is undoubtedly impossible to stop the charge of 2,000 tanks. That's why everyone thinks that, even though the British and French coalition forces have an absolute advantage in strength, the victory must belong to the German army. Your Majesty, if possible, the Imperial Army hopes to form 2 new legions as a reserve force on the Western Front. Von Falkenhayn said, taking the opportunity. Although the German army already has 10 legions, its total strength is only over 2 million. This is equivalent to the population of the German army, and the mobilization is not sufficient. At best only 50% of the mobilization has been carried out. Not to mention comparing it with Russia, which has a large population. Even France, which has a much smaller population than Germany, has no fewer troops than Germany in terms of army strength. And this naturally made the generals of the German army a little bit unwilling. If we defeat the British and French allied forces in this battle, we will be able to win the war. Is it necessary to form more troops? William II frowned. After all, if 2 more legions are formed, the total strength of the German army will be almost 3 million. This requires a lot of money to be able to afford it. Although, the war has only passed half a year. Germany was well prepared for this war. But even so, it cost them a lot. The lives of the domestic people have also been more or less affected. If they hadn't been fully prepared before the war broke out, maybe even food and other supplies would be restricted. Even so, it would undoubtedly be best if the war could end earlier. Further, there are not many more legions. The 2 newly formed legions can be sent to East Prussia and Poland to replace the 9th and 10th legions to the Western Front as a reserve for the troops on the Western Front. This will make our troops on the Western Front stronger. In addition, even if we defeat the British and French allied forces in France, we will need a large army in a while. In the style of the British, the possibility of them surrendering to us is almost zero. Therefore, we have to send troops to land in the UK Isles and fight the British. Preliminary estimates require us to invest about 5 legions. The rest the troops need to strengthen the control of the occupied areas. For example, France, Belgium, Poland, the Baltic Sea coast, Belarus, and Ukraine, etc. all need to station a large number of troops in order to ensure our effective control of these areas and establish our presence there. Only in this way can we have enough troops to control these areas. Qin Tian said. Although the Cloth Party in Germany have signed a treaty ceding a large area of territory to the German Empire. However, those territories were not immediately occupied by Germany. After all, such a huge territory requires many soldiers to complete the occupation. What's more, there are many resistance forces in those areas, and various guerrillas are active very frequently. Qin Tian didn't want Germany to fall into the quagmire of the People's War like this. After Germany completely won the war, he will send troops to these areas on a large scale to complete the occupation of these areas. In that case, under the deterrence of the strong forces of the German army, those resisting forces have nothing to do. As for the Cloth Party, although they are not reconciled, they want to go back on their word. However, in the face of Germany, which has already won the World War, do they have the courage to go back on their word? Therefore, they can only watch Germany occupy the most fertile land in Russia. This is equivalent to weakening Russia's strength in disguise. When waiting for a future war, Germany's chances of winning will naturally be greater. William II thought about it and finally decided to form 2 more legions, namely the 11th Legion and the 12th Legion, which increased the strength of the German army by more than 400,000. Your Excellency Chief of Staff, when can we start our attack on the British and French allied forces? William II asked. He undoubtedly attaches great importance to the Western Front, because it is directly related to whether Germany can win the war. Your Majesty, our legions have already completed their preparations. All the troops have assembled to the predetermined positions, and a large amount of combat supplies have also arrived at the front line. At most 3 days, we can launch an attack. Then, Falkenhayn said. The battle involving more than 1.8 million troops is undoubtedly very complicated. Even if the German General Staff has the most perfect system and excellent talents, it is also very difficult to do all this easily. Launch an attack in 3 days. Well, yes. I have a hope, that is to defeat the British and French allied forces, and occupy Paris within a month. I wonder if everyone has confidence in this? William II asked. Although, after the war broke out, Germany also hoped to defeat France within a month, just like the Franco-Prussian War back then. However, at that time they completely underestimated the tragic extent of modern warfare. Under the heroic resistance of the French army, the war turned into a trench warfare, which caused the German army to fail to achieve the planned results despite heavy losses. So, this time, William II's strategic goal of defeating the British and French allied forces and occupying Paris within 1 month is not too big. If the development of the war situation is beneficial to the German army, it is not impossible to achieve this strategic goal. Your Majesty, we will do our best to achieve this strategic goal, von Falkenhayn said. Even he didn't dare to fully guarantee it. William II nodded and did not force anything. Everyone, with regard to this war, I have decided that Oscar will be fully in charge, and he will be the commander of the Western Front. I hope that all of you will follow his orders without reservation, so that we can fight in the West, on the frontline battlefield, get a brilliant victory. William II finally announced the order. Chapter 482, Battle Plan. All the generals of the army were stunned. They did not expect that William II would issue such an order. Wouldn't this hand over the 8 main armies on the Western Front and the 2 armies that were immediately transferred to serve as reserves? Have you given Qin Tian command? In this case, it is almost equivalent to putting the entire German army under Qin Tian's control. You know, William II's character is very conceited and suspicious, and he doesn't trust anyone at all except himself. To be able to make him make such a decision is undoubtedly very incredible. Of course, with Qin Tian's identity and influence in the army, it is undoubtedly very appropriate for him to command the battle on the Western Front. Even though Qin Tian is still very young, even those veterans can't help but be convinced by his achievements. It seems that His Majesty the Emperor has completely confirmed that His Highness the Crown Prince will inherit his throne, and there will be no change in any of this. Almost all the generals had this idea in their minds. Yes, Your Majesty, we will definitely cooperate with His Royal Highness the Crown Prince. Everyone replied. Under such circumstances, naturally no one would be stupid enough to object. Even among those generals, some had a very close relationship with Crown Prince William. However, with Crown Prince William becoming a vegetative state, it was already inevitable for Qin Tian to ascend the throne. Now, Qin Tian has even more wings. Even if Crown Prince William wakes up, there is no way to prevent him from ascending to the throne. Father, I will definitely lead the army to defeat the British and French allied forces and defeat France. Qin Tian also assured William II. This is an opportunity for him to establish a leading position in the army, and he will not be stupid enough to refuse. Qin Tian vaguely believed that after this battle was over, his position would truly be unshakable. With the German Empire already having a great chance of winning this world war, Qin Tian naturally didn't want to give up the opportunity to control this powerful empire. Power is so intoxicating, no one will give up voluntarily after tasting the taste of power. King William II nodded. Well, very good. Then the next battle plan is up to you to discuss, and I will go back. After William II finished speaking, he left the war room. Now William II is not young anymore, and his energy is not enough. And Qin Tian's performance was extremely excellent, which naturally allowed him to safely and boldly hand over the empire to Qin Tian to command. He can use this time to deal with other affairs. You know, ruling a huge empire like the German Empire is undoubtedly very busy. All kinds of affairs are on his shoulders. Now that someone can share part of the pressure, William II is naturally desperate. After William II left, the war conference continued. However, the way these imperial army generals looked at Qin Tian also changed. Before, they regarded Qin Tian as the crown prince of the empire, and respected Qin Tian very much. However, Qin Tian can't really decide their fate, unless Qin Tian really inherited the throne from William II one day. But now, an order from William II directly made Qin Tian the immediate boss of their group. They naturally need to obey Qin Tian's orders. Everyone, in the next period of time, please support my work. Qin Tian looked at the generals with a smile on his face. His Royal Highness, please rest assured that you are the crown prince of the empire, and now you are the commander of the Western Front. We will definitely do our best to assist you. It was General Ruprecht, the commander of the German 6th Army, who spoke. He is also the wife of the Kingdom of Bavaria and Qin Tian's brother-in-law. As for Qin Tian, of course he had to fully support him. The other generals also expressed their opinions one after another, and they will definitely support Qin Tian with all their strength. Regardless of whether they really want it in their hearts, at least on the surface they still need to make such an appearance. Qin Tian nodded in satisfaction, and then looked at Chief of Staff von Falkenhayn. Your Excellency, Chief of Staff, please introduce the battle plan to everyone. Yes, His Royal Highness the Crown Prince. Von Falkenhayn nodded. As the Imperial Army Minister and Chief of Staff, von Falkenhayn is from Qin Tian. If Qin Tian hadn't supported him, it would have been impossible for him to squeeze out Malky and serve as the Chief of the General Staff. Of course, one of the main reasons is that Malky made a mistake in command on the Western Front, which caused the German army to suffer heavy losses on the Western Front, but failed to achieve the intended combat objectives. This aroused the dissatisfaction of William II, and Qin Tian's help finally made William II remove Maoki. Even though von Falkenhayn served as the Chief of the General Staff and became the #1 person in the army, he was still loyal to Qin Tian. In his opinion, Qin Tian has achieved what he is now at such an age, and he will definitely be a great emperor in the future. If you follow Qin Tian's words, you will definitely be famous in history. Everyone, at present we have assembled 8 legions on the Western Front. Except for the 7th and 6th legions, the other 5 legions are all assembled on the north side of the Marne River. Therefore, our efforts in this battle, the primary goal is to cross the Marne River, defeat the British and French allied forces, and then attack Paris, defeating France in one fell swoop. Von Falkenhayn said. The specific battle plan is as follows. The 1st Army and the 8th Army, forming a right-wing group, set off from Amiens, attack Rouen, cross the Seine there, and then attack Paris eastward. The 2nd Army, the 3rd Army and the 8th Army, the 4th Army attacked the Marne River defense line of the British and French allied forces, and supported the 1st and 8th Army. The 6th Army and the 7th Army attacked Verdun from the east. After taking it, they attacked all the way west. Together with the 4th Army, we will attack Paris. In this battle, our main strategic goal will be to wipe out the main force of the British and French coalition forces in Paris and the front lines of the Marne River. Von Falkenhayn said, Your Excellency Chief of Staff, if you start from Amiens, capture Rouen, and then turn back to attack Paris, the distance will be almost 200 kilometers. This will undoubtedly be extremely difficult for large troops. #1 General Crook, the regiment commander, raised doubts. General Crook, we will prepare a large number of trucks for the 1st Army and the 8th Army to ensure the supply of combat materials. At the same time, we can also use trucks and the French railway network to transport troops and combat materials. If it goes well, there is no problem advancing to Paris within half a month, Qin Tian said. Admiral Crook nodded and said no more. Chapter 483, Prologue to the Battle of the Western Front. Reims, an important city in northeastern France. Now, it is already under the control of the German army. Northern France has a convenient railway network and a dense road network, allowing the German army to use these transportation facilities to quickly mobilize troops and supplies. The German Western Front Command was established in Reims. Imperial Crown Prince Qin Tian and a group of generals arrived here on March 28. Now Qin Tian is still serving as the commander of the 8th Army. However, the Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Ludendorff, is responsible for all the affairs of the 8th Army. Qin Tian only needs to be responsible in the general direction. Qin Tian valued Lieutenant General Ludendorff's ability very much and intended to further train him. After the war is over, he has even planned to be the commander of the Legion or the Deputy Chief of Staff. Qin Tian stood in the war room of the headquarters, looking at the map hanging on the wall. Please clearly mark the situation of the enemy and the enemy with red and black on it. The 8 legions of the German army formed 4 clusters. That is, the right-wing cluster formed by the 1st and 8th legions, the central cluster composed of the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th legions, and the left-wing cluster composed of the 6th and 7th legions. The central group has 4 legions, with a total force of 820,000, the strongest force. The total strength of the right-wing cluster is 500,000, and the total strength of the left-wing cluster is more than 400,000. Compared with the German army, the Anglo-French allied forces represented in red have stronger troops. The French army, the British Expeditionary Force, and the numbers of each unit are densely deployed on the south bank of the Marne River, as well as the area from the south of Amiens to the north of Paris. Manstein, our military strength is only about 60% of the British and French allied forces. It will be difficult to defeat them in this battle. Qin Tian said, Your Highness, we have fought many times to win more battles with less. I believe that we can also win this time. Major General Manstein is full of confidence in this. I'm also confident of winning. However, the British and French allied forces are not Russian after all, so we need to be careful this time. Qin Tian said. In Qin Tian's view, the fighting power of the British and French allied forces is undoubtedly much stronger than that of the Russian army. Yes, Your Highness. Manstein nodded. Your Highness, General Bülow, General Hausen, Duke of Württemberg and General Dimmling are here. A staff officer came in and reported. Let them all come in. Qin Tian said. Admiral Bülow is the commander of the 2nd Army, Admiral Hausen is the commander of the 3rd Army, the Duke of Württemberg is the commander of the 4th Army, and Admiral Dimmling is the commander of the 5th Army. If it weren't for the fact that Crown Prince William was thrown into a vegetable, the commander of the 5th Army should be his. Your Highness. Several generals saluted Qin Tian. Please sit down, everyone. Manstein, send someone to bring coffee. Qin Tian said. Okay, Your Highness. Major General Manstein immediately went to make arrangements. Generals, are your troops ready? Qin Tian asked. Your Highness, the 2nd Army Corps is ready to fight and is ready to launch an attack at any time. General Bülow said. Several other legion commanders also expressed their opinions. Qin Tian nodded. According to the previously planned combat objectives, the 2nd Army is responsible for attacking Champagne-Châlons, the 3rd Army is responsible for attacking Epinay, the 4th Army is responsible for attacking Château-Thierry, and the 5th Army is the reserve force, ready to reinforce the frontline ministries at any time. Several generals nodded repeatedly. They already knew about these combat missions at the last pre-war meeting. According to the information we have received, the armies facing us include the French 2nd Army, 4th Army, 6th Army, 8th Army, 9th Army, and the 2nd Army of the British Expeditionary Force, with a total strength of more than 1.2 million troops. There are more than 400,000 people more than us. But even so, I believe we will be able to defeat them. Your Highness, our troops have been strengthened. Each legion has formed an armored force, and the firepower of the ministries below has also been strengthened. Even if the British and French coalition forces are 400,000 more than ours, we can still defeat them. Admiral Hausen said. For the past 6 months, the German army has been preparing. The weapons developed by the German Military Industry Company have been tested through the performance of the 8th Army on the Eastern Front. In addition, Xiaomoqi was dismissed, and the new Chief of Staff, von Falkenhayn, was from Qin Tian, so the weapons developed by the German Arms Company began to equip the armies on the Western Front. It's just that, because of the limited time, each legion does not carry out a comprehensive refit like the 8th Legion, but among the infantry units, machine gun firepower and semi-automatic rifles have been strengthened. If it weren't for the heavy task of the right-wing cluster, Qin Tian planned to transfer the 8th Army to the central cluster. However, for the right-wing group, To attack 200 kilometers long distance, it needs stronger combat effectiveness and maneuverability, which made Qin Tian place the 8th Army on the right wing. Seeing that everyone has confidence in this, Qin Tian is still very satisfied. With the rigorous character of the Germans, he believed that these generals were not bragging. Besides, he is the crown prince of the empire, the future crown prince of the empire. If these guys brag in front of him, there will be plenty of ways to deal with them after he becomes emperor. At 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, our central group will take the lead in launching an attack. The day after tomorrow, the left-wing group and right-wing group will launch an attack. I hope that we can set an example and break through the Marne River defense line of the British and French coalition forces within 3 days. Qin Tian said. Yes, Your Highness. Several commanders replied. Everyone is confident about it. Qin Tian talked with several generals about the current battle situation and the possible movements of the British and French coalition forces after the battle started. From the conversation with them, Qin Tian could feel there although, while the German army was resting, the British and French allied forces were not idle, and were also preparing for the war. They mobilized a large number of troops, and built strong fortifications on the south bank of the Marne in an attempt to stop the German attack through trench warfare. However, the generals of the German army are still full of confidence in this battle. Everyone believes that under the attack of the powerful German army, the victory will definitely belong to the German Empire. The narrow Marne River is absolutely unable to withstand the attack of the German army. In this battle, the German army not only strengthened the infantry firepower, but also received a large number of armored reinforcement. The 4 armored divisions in the central cluster added up to thousands of tanks. In addition, the 4 air teams also have thousands of combat aircraft. This will make their offensive even more violent. Chapter 484. Encourage fighting spirit. A small town called Montmirail, 20 kilometers southwest of Epernay, has been controlled by the army. A French infantry division was stationed here, and the whole city was under martial law. The residents living here looked at the soldiers patrolling the streets in amazement. Some bold women even took the initiative to wink at those tall soldiers. Because of the invasion of the German army, the French army had already suffered a series of failures in the early stages of the war, so France had to increase its mobilization step by step. Most of the adult men either joined the army or were produced in the arsenal, making the number of adult men in French society very small. This undoubtedly makes the romantic life of French women empty and lonely. They seem to have forgotten that their husbands are fighting the Germans on the front line, while they stay in the rear, wantonly cuckolding their husbands. Several cars drove into the city hall, which was heavily guarded by the French army. An older soldier, accompanied by a group of shining generals, entered the city hall. This old soldier is the well-known Marshal Joseph Joffre, who is now the commander-in-chief of the French army. However, because of a series of disastrous defeats by the French army on the battlefield, his position as commander-in-chief has been shaken. If the German army had not took the initiative to stop the offensive last year, and the French army had failed once or twice, maybe his commander would have been replaced. The group went directly to the meeting room of the city hall. At this moment, there were more generals in the meeting room. Most of the generals of the British and French coalition forces on the front line of the Marne River have appeared here at this moment. The commander-in-chief is here. When Marshal Ziafeni entered the meeting room, a staff officer immediately announced loudly. Suddenly, the voices of the generals whispering to each other in the meeting room disappeared immediately, replaced by the sound of chairs being bumped. A group of generals stood up one by one and saluted Marshal Ziafeni. "Well, everyone sit down," Marshal Ziafeni said kindly. The generals all sat down neatly, and everyone looked at Marshal Ziafeni. Everyone knows that the current situation is very critical, and a large-scale battle is imminent. For the British and French allied forces, they will face a tough battle next. Everyone, according to the information we have received, the Germans have completed their preparations again. It is very likely that their offensive will start soon, possibly tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. In short, this time is not long. But, what I want to tell you is that last year, we were able to resist the German attack. This time, we can also resist their attack and defeat them in one fell swoop, Marshal Joffre said confidently. Marshal Ziafa's confident appearance seemed to have infected other generals of the British and French coalition forces, and they were also full of confidence in the next battle. They seemed to have forgotten that last year, they had just suffered a disastrous defeat, and were almost defeated by the Germans, even the capital. The French may be like this by nature, although the Germans caused us heavy losses last year. However, with the support of us and our British allies, we successfully resisted their attacks. After more than half a year of preparation, the total strength of the British and French coalition forces has now exceeded 3. There are 1 million people. The Germans still only have an army of more than 2 million. In terms of military strength, we have a greater advantage than the Germans. In terms of weapons and equipment, we are no worse than the Germans. In addition, we have spent the past 6 months on the south bank of the Marne, built a strong fortification. Therefore, it is almost impossible for the Germans to break through our fortifications. We will soon see that they will hit the head on our defense line. The blood is broken. After our defense line consumes all the vital strength of the Germans, we can launch a counterattack, defeat the Germans in one fell swoop, drive them out of our land, and even hit the Germans in one fell swoop. Arrest all their emperors and crown princes, send them to the gallows, and make them pay for what they have done. Marshal Ziafe continued. I have to admit that Marshal Joffre's speech was very inspiring, and the generals of the British and French allied forces who attended the meeting were all excited, as if the combat effectiveness of the French army had doubled all of a sudden, and they could easily fight against the French army. German army defeated. However, the real senior generals of the British and French coalition forces are not as easy to bewitch as those low-level generals. They clearly remembered how much the German army had caused them on the battlefield last year. This time, after a lapse of half a year, the German army made a comeback after careful preparations. No need to think about it, how much their strength has improved. Although the strength of the British and French coalition forces has also improved a lot. But whether they can withstand the German attack, they are even more uncertain. Not to mention the current international situation, it is very unfavorable to the Allies. As the Royal Navy was defeated by the German Navy in the decisive battle at sea, it seemed that Germany was only one step away from winning this war. As long as the German army defeats the British and French allied forces on the French battlefield, it will be able to win the final victory. This also made the generals of the British and French coalition forces undoubtedly feel great pressure. If it fails again this time, the allied powers will probably end in failure in this war. The people present here are undoubtedly high-level people from Britain and France, and they are all people who hold great power. If Britain and France lose in this war, then they are finished. Therefore, even if it is a desperate fight, they all hope to win the war. Anyway, it was not them who actually went to the battlefield to fight the Germans, but those ordinary failures, and their safety could undoubtedly be guaranteed. Generals, you are the bravest people in the French Republic and the British Empire. I hope that in this battle, you can show your bravery and lead your troops to resist the German attack and defeat them. Victory belongs to the French Empire and the British Empire. Marshal Joffre continued. Long live the French Republic. Long live the British Empire. All the generals roared, as if the roof of the conference room was about to be blown over. Inspired by Marshal Ziafe, these generals all ignited their fighting spirit and determined to fight the German army to the death. Their fighting spirit will also inspire their subordinates and ordinary soldiers, allowing them to fight the Germans desperately on the battlefield. Chapter 485, Defensive Counterattack. After Marshal Ziafe finished his speech, ordinary generals all left the conference room. They need to rush back to the station of their troops as soon as possible to prepare for the German attack. No one knows when the German offensive will start. Therefore, it is best to prepare early, so as not to be caught off guard by the German army. The commanders of several group armies stayed. They still have urgent military needs to discuss with Marshal Joffre. After those ordinary generals left, the atmosphere in the conference room also became dignified. Gentlemen, those words just now are just to inspire everyone's fighting spirit. I hope that you, the commanders of the group army, don't take it seriously. You know, our enemy is still very strong. After half a year of preparation, we will face there is a greater threat from them. This battle is crucial. If we cannot stop the German attack, then everything will be over. the French Republic will be over, and so will the British Empire. Sire, Marshal Fenny said with a serious face. A group of generals of the British and French allied forces also looked dignified. They all knew that Marshal Joffre was not alarmist. This is a very real situation. The Allies, or Britain and France, are already in an extremely disadvantageous situation in this battle. If you don't grasp it well, Kang Po will be defeated in the end. Once it fails, the consequences can naturally be imagined. According to the information we have, the Germans have already completed their preparations. Reims, not far from here, is the headquarters of the German army. This battle will be personally commanded by the German Crown Prince. However, he seems to have us. We have become weak Russians, thinking that we are as vulnerable as the Russians. Marshal Joffre continued. Isn't the German Crown Prince only in his 20s? How dare Wilhelm II entrust so many troops to him to command? It's a joke. A middle-aged general shook his head. He is a general of the British Army and General Roy, commander of the 2nd Army of the British Expeditionary Force. Perhaps William II was blinded by the performance of the German Crown Prince on the Eastern Front. The Western Front is not the Eastern Front, and we are not poorly equipped Russians who are vulnerable to a single blow. French 2nd Army Admiral Decazes said. Haha. All the generals laughed. Indeed, they are qualified to laugh. The strength of the British and French allied forces is indeed much stronger than that of the Russian army. Therefore, they do not think that the German army has the ability to defeat them as easily as they defeated the Russian army. In their view, this is absolutely impossible. Okay, everyone. Let's all be serious. The German army opposite us has 4 armies with more than 800,000 people. Although, we have assembled 6 armies with 1.2 million people on the Marne River line. However, I still have no idea. I hope that in the next battle, our army can withstand the German attack. Even if we try our best, we must resist them, and try our best to consume their energy vitality. Marshal Zayafei said, Your Excellency, Marshal, we have built strong fortifications in the south of the Marne River. These fortifications, which are composed of trenches and barbed wire, must be able to withstand the German attack. Admiral Maunouly, commander of the French 6th Army said, Your Excellency, Commander, how should we deal with the German tanks? German tanks have displayed great combat effectiveness on the Eastern Front. The reason why the German 8th Army was able to defeat the Russian army on the Eastern Front, the tanks have played a huge role. General Foch, the commander of the French 9th Army, asked with some concern, We are already actively developing tanks. Unfortunately, we have no similar design before, and we can only imitate them according to German tanks. But we don't know many internal structures inside. Therefore, the progress of imitation is a bit slow. It is estimated that mass production will not start until the end of this year. The progress of the British side is almost the same. So, until now, we have not been able to provide tanks to the troops. Marshal Zayafei said. With the help of Qin Tian, Germany took the lead in developing tanks and equipped them with troops, which also played a very important role in actual combat. In contrast, Britain and France are far behind in this respect. This made the British and French coalition forces suffer a lot if they encountered German tanks in battle. Sure enough, after hearing such words, the smiles on the faces of the generals of the British and French allied forces disappeared immediately. However, although we have not been able to develop tanks, however, we have developed weapons that can restrain tanks. Aren't those weapons already equipped with troops? Please believe our scientists and engineers. Those weapons must be. It will play a great role in the battle. Marshal Zayafei said. Under the circumstances, that tanks could not be put into service as soon as possible, Britain and France jointly developed anti-tank guns and anti-tank guns. The former is based on the 2-pound gun of the British Army as a prototype. The barrel is strengthened, the rate of fire is enhanced, and it has good armor-piercing ability. The latter is a large-bore rifle capable of firing 13mm bullets. This rifle bullet has extremely strong armor-piercing ability and can penetrate the armor of ordinary tanks. After the large-scale production of anti-tank guns and anti-tank guns in Britain and France, the British and French allied forces have equipped a lot. This makes them at least not like the Russians, who are helpless in the face of German tanks. Your Excellency, Marshal, in the face of the German attack, can we only blindly defend? This is not very good, General. Neville, commander of the French Fourth Army, said. Okay, I will try my best to find a solution in terms of armaments. Your task is to hold the line of defense and cause as much damage as possible to the Germans. Prepare for the follow-up counterattack. I hope you can do this. 1 point. In this way, we may defeat the Germans in future battles, Marshal Joffre said. Marshal Joffre and British Expeditionary Force Commander Sir French discussed the tactic, which was defensive counterattack, relying on solid fortifications to resist the German attack and consume the German army's vital strength. Then gather superior forces, launch a counterattack, and strive to defeat the German army in one fell swoop. Therefore, at the beginning of the battle, it is undoubtedly the most important to resist the German attack. If the German attack cannot be resisted, let alone a follow-up counterattack. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 486, Firepower Preparation. On the morning of March 31st, 1915, the positions of the 4 Corps of the German Army Central Group were already busy. Although the 5th Army served as a reserve team, their artillery still participated in this attack. After Qin Tian became the commander of the Western Front, the tactics he advocated were naturally carried out to all the troops on the Western Front. In each attack, sufficient firepower preparations will be made so that the infantry that follows the attack can clear obstacles and reduce the loss of troops. Qin Tian was very disgusted with every battle on the Western Front, which often caused hundreds of thousands or hundreds of thousands of casualties. Germany's population was not large, even fewer adult men. Every adult man is undoubtedly precious. Such waste on the battlefield is undoubtedly very detrimental to subsequent operations and the future development of Germany. Qin Tian got up early in the morning and together with Major General Manstein, inspected the German positions. On a more than 100-kilometer long defense line, the artillery of the 4 legions is preparing for firing. In the past 6 months, the 4 armies of the German army have increased their artillery strength. Originally, only the 8th Army was equipped with 150mm heavy artillery at the division level, but now all armies are equipped with it. The 75mm field gun also replaced the previous 77mm field gun, which strengthened the artillery strength of the various German regiments. It seems that the French have prepared carefully in the past 6 months. They have already built a solid fortification on the south bank of the Marne River. It is not easy for us to break through their fortification. Standing on a small hillside, Qin Tian used the binoculars to easily see the positions of the British and French coalition forces on the south bank of the Marne River. Those positions are only tens of meters away from the river bank. There are endless barbed wire fences and trenches, and even anti-tank trenches. The entire Anglo-French position on the south bank of the Marne River has become a fortress with dense trenches. Under such circumstances, if the infantry launched an attack, the difficulty can be imagined. Your Highness, I hope that our artillery can destroy the position of the British and French allied forces on the other side of the river. After the assault troops cross the river and establish a solid bridgehead, the armored troops will be able to cross the river. At that time, the tracks of the tanks, these positions of the British and French allied forces will be crushed. Manstein said. He is full of confidence in the German armored forces. On the Eastern Front, the German armored forces made great facing the attack of the German armored forces. The Russian army could not resist at all, and was easily defeated by the German army in the end. Qin Tian nodded. Is our aviation team ready? In the past 6 months, in addition to focusing on the development of armored forces, the German army has also focused on the development of the aviation team. In addition to the establishment of the 8th Army's Air Force, several other legions have also established their own air force one after another. Each air force has more than 250 aircraft, basically half of which are fighters jets and half bombers. This allowed the German air power to be strengthened once again. You must know that, although the British and French coalition forces also have some aircraft at this moment, they are not many, at most 1 or 200. Moreover, the performance of those aircraft is completely incomparable with that of the German aircraft. There is no doubt that the German army dominates the sky on the Western Front. Your Highness, it's ready. 3 days ago, the air teams have entered the airport we built in northern France. This time, the air teams will provide us with aerial reconnaissance and fire support, said Manstein. Well, there is still half an hour before the attack will start. We must ensure the smooth supply of logistics. This time, the artillery preparation will take a day, Qin Tian said. In order to smash the trenches built by the British and French allied forces on the south bank of the Marne River, the German army prepared for a long-term firepower preparation. The day-long firepower preparation, you don't need to think about how many shells will be fired. Therefore, Qin Tian required that the logistic supply must be unblocked. Otherwise, if the shells are exhausted and cannot be replenished, how will the subsequent battles be fought? Your Highness, we have already prepared logistical support in advance. The ammunition stored is enough for us to fight a large-scale battle. Moreover, a large number of trains are continuously passing through the railway, transporting combat supplies from the country to northern France. There will be no problems with all logistical support, Major General Manstein replied. We must pay attention to preventing French guerrillas from attacking our supply lines, Qin Tian said. Although northern France is now occupied by the German army, there are still many French people who are unwilling to be subjugated slaves. They organize guerrillas and attack the German army's supply lines, convoys, and sentries, causing certain casualties to the German army. This forced the German army to deploy a considerable number of troops in the rear. Otherwise, these guerrillas will have a great impact on the fighting on the German front. Yes, Your Highness. Major General Manstein nodded. Qin Tian picked up the binoculars and continued to watch the situation on the other side of the Marne River. In the spring, the Marne River has begun to increase its water volume due to the influx of ice and snow meltwater. But even so, the width of the river is less than 50 meters, and most river sections are only 30 to 40 meters. The depth of the river is just below the top of a person's head. Although it is impossible to wade directly across the river, it is not a big problem for engineers to erect pontoon bridges. The British and French allied forces on the south bank of the Marne River also discovered the situation of the German army across the river and became nervous. A large number of British and French soldiers began to enter the position, ready to resist the German attack. In this battle, it seems that there is no need for any tactics or intrigues, and it depends entirely on the strength of the two sides. The stronger side can crush the weaker side in battle and win. Other than that, there seems to be no other way at all. The time passed by every minute and every second, and soon it was 8 o'clock in the morning. On the German artillery position, the commander gave the order to fire. Boom, boom, boom. The cannons began to roar, and the shells, under the action of kinetic energy, slammed into the French army's position. Boom. The artillery shell exploded on the British-French coalition's position, and the earth and rocks were scattered all over the place. The shrapnel was mixed in the earth and rocks, and they shot around, harvesting all the lives they encountered. Although, the soldiers of the British and French allied forces had already hid in the strong anti-gun holes when the German shelling just started. However, the fortifications on the position began to be destroyed under the heavy shelling of the German army. Chapter 487, Artillery Battle. The four armies of the German Central Group have a total of 47 infantry divisions, and the number of artillery in each infantry division is also equipped in the same way as the infantry divisions of the 8th Army. This makes the four armies add up to 846 150mm heavy howitzers, 1692 105mm light howitzers and 2538 75mm field guns, not counting mortars and grenades, etc. These artillery add up there are more than 5,000. Gates. You must know that the length of the attack positions of the four German armies is only 100 kilometers. Calculated in this way, there are more than 50 artillery pieces deployed per kilometer. This density is already outrageous. If you count the mortars and grenades of various troops, the number of artillery that the German army will invest in this war will be even greater. The Anglo-French coalition forces on the opposite side, even though their strength far exceeds that of the German army. However, in terms of the number of artillery, it is far from being comparable to the German army. Boom. 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 On the artillery positions of the German army, the artillerymen have taken off their shirts, and their strong bodies have been wet with sweat. Although, in Western Europe at the end of March, it was not hot, and there was even a hint of coolness. However, the soldiers were sweating profusely during the heavy process of carrying the shells. Every artilleryman is firing at the maximum rate of fire, smashing as many shells as possible onto the positions of the British and French coalition forces. No matter whether the enemy can be killed or not, as long as they can destroy their defensive positions, it will undoubtedly be extremely important. Big win. In the previous battles, many German soldiers died on the way to attack. Facing the trenches of the British and French allied forces, coupled with barbed wire and machine gun fire points, every step forward often requires great casualties. Therefore, when preparing for firepower, if the positions of the British and French coalition forces can be destroyed, this will undoubtedly be of great benefit to subsequent operations. Boom. 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 Shells hit the positions of the British and French coalition forces like raindrops, and there were violent explosions everywhere. During the explosion, the defensive positions built by the British and French allied forces were blown up to the sky. The barbed wire fence was blown up and down, and the firepower points of the machine guns were directly destroyed. However, the British and French allied forces are much more professional than the Russian army in soil work. This makes their fortifications undoubtedly much stronger than those of the Russian army. In particular, the anti-bunker holes, where the soldiers hid, have been specially reinforced. As long as it is not hit continuously by large caliber heavy artillery, there will be no major problems under normal circumstances. Therefore, it is almost impossible to cause too many casualties to the British and French coalition forces during firepower preparations. However, the British and French allied forces hiding in the anti-gun caves are certainly safe, but the fortifications outside can't resist it. Under the heavy shelling of the German army, a large number of fortifications were destroyed. Damn it, how many cannons did the Germans assemble? Are they trying to completely destroy our position? Admiral Decazzetano, commander of the French Second Army, saw the turmoil of his troops. The position was completely covered by gunpowder smoke and flames, and he couldn't help but curse. Although, before each attack, both sides will carry out powerful firepower preparations, which has become a practice on the Western Front battlefield. However, this time, Admiral Decazzetano still felt something different. That is, the artillery fire of the German army seemed to be stronger than it was half a year ago. General, among the German artillery, there seem to be 150mm heavy artillery, and there are quite a few of them. An artillery general reminded. Have all the heavy artillery moved to the battlefield? It seems that they are determined to win this attack. Admiral Decazzetano's face was serious. General, the German field guns seem to be different. The rate of fire is very fast, and it can almost catch up with our 75mm field guns. Another general said. Damn the Germans, they must have imitated our 75mm field gun shamelessly. Those despicable guys are simply too shameless. The airstrike. Admiral Turno couldn't help cursing. The 75mm field gun of the French army has a very fast rate of fire, with a maximum rate of fire of 15 rounds per minute. This is regarded as a secret weapon by the French army. Every infantry division is equipped with 36 such artillery pieces. As for larger caliber artillery, the French army is rarely equipped. During the battle in the second half of last year, the French army succeeded in severely injuring the German army with this fast-firing and powerful 75mm field gun. Although, in the artillery battle with the large caliber artillery of the German army, the French army suffered a lot of losses. But overall, their 75mm field gun was very successful. Qin Tian disclosed the key technology of the French army's 75mm field gun to the Krupp factory. With Krupp's scientific and technological strength, after mastering the key technology, it is naturally easy to give the French army's 75mm field gun to the factory. Imitation came out, and improvements have also been made, such as greatly reducing the weight of the artillery, making the transportation and deployment of the artillery more flexible. To some extent, the performance of the 75mm field guns equipped by the German army is already stronger than that of the 75mm field guns equipped by the French army. General, Your Excellency, the Marshal ordered us to counterattack immediately, and we cannot let the German artillery destroy our defensive positions. A staff officer reported. Admiral Decker's Eterno nodded. Order the artillery to counterattack immediately, to suppress the German shelling. Yes, General. Almost at the same time, several groups armies deployed by the British and French coalition forces on the front line also received orders to counterattack. Their artillery immediately entered the position and counterattacked. A fierce artillery battle ensued. Among the 6 legions, deployed by the British and French coalition forces on the Marne River, 4 of them were deployed on the front line. The other 2 legions were deployed in the rear as reserves. After all, in order to resist the German attack, it is very necessary to keep sufficient reserves. Otherwise, once the battle is unfavorable and there is not enough reserves to counterattack, the consequences will be serious. Counterattack immediately, suppress the Germans. The artillery commanders of the British and French coalition forces issued an order. A series of 75mm field guns, 105mm field guns, 83.8mm field guns, and 114mm howitzers started a fierce counterattack. Among them, the 75mm field gun and 105mm howitzer are equipped by the French army, and the 83.8mm field gun and 114mm howitzer are equipped by the British army. However, the number of 105mm howitzers equipped by the French army is very small, and the most important artillery is 75mm field guns. Chapter 488, Airstrike. French infantry divisions, each equipped with 36 75mm field guns, and a very small number of 105mm howitzers. British infantry divisions, each equipped with 58 83.8mm field guns and 18 114mm howitzers. The 4 armies deployed by the British and French allied forces on the front line are 1 British Expeditionary Army and 3 French armies. These troops are equipped with a total of 1,296 75mm field guns, more than 100 105mm howitzers, 696 83.8mm field guns and 216 114mm howitzers. Although such artillery is already considered very powerful, however, compared with the German army, it is undoubtedly much worse. In terms of quantity, it is only less than half of the German army. More importantly, they did not have heavy guns above 150mm caliber. The heavy artillery of the 105mm howitzer level is also seriously less than that of the German army. This also made the British and French allied forces completely suppressed by the German army in the artillery battle. Boom. 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 The artillery of the British and French coalition forces began to fire on the German artillery positions in an attempt to suppress the German artillery, protect their positions, and prevent their positions from being destroyed by German artillery fire. It's just that most of the artillery positions of the German army are deployed far from the front line. The artillery of the British and French allied forces, except for a few 105mm howitzers and 114mm howitzers, are simply out of reach. On the contrary, they were discovered by the German army as soon as they fired. Under the guidance of reconnaissance planes and observation balloons, the artillery positions of the German army began to cover the artillery positions of the British and French allied forces. Your Highness, the artillery of the British and French coalition forces opened fire. Our Highness, the artillery positions of the British and French coalition forces opened fire. Artillery began to use 105mm howitzers and 150mm howitzers to attack their artillery positions. Major General Manstein said. Qin Tian nodded, using a telescope to observe the situation of the British and French allied forces on the opposite side. Sure enough, pillars of smoke soon rose behind the British and French allied forces. Those places were where the British and French allied forces deployed their cannons. It's just that these artillery positions of the British and French allied forces are completely within the range of the German artillery. Especially the 150mm heavy artillery can directly pose a great threat to the artillery positions of the British and French coalition forces. Boom. 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 You must know that the 105mm howitzers and 150mm howitzers possessed by the four armies of the German army are larger in number than all the artillery possessed by the British and French allied forces combined. When these artillery were concentrated to bombard the positions of the British and French allied forces, the consequences can naturally be imagined. The artillery positions of the British and French allied forces were destroyed one after another under the heavy shelling of the German army. Very well done. If this continues, it won't be long before the artillery of the British and French coalition forces will be completely lost. At that time, our cannons will be able to continuously bombard their positions and destroy their fortifications. All destroyed. Qin Tian was very satisfied with the performance of the artillery. After solving the artillery of the British and French allied forces, the artillery of the German army will be able to fire at the positions of the British and French allied forces without interference. With fierce artillery fire, all the fortifications of the British and French coalition forces were directly smashed, clearing the way for the subsequent infantry attack. Although the artillery battle was very tragic, the artillerymen on both sides couldn't meet each other, but once the shells they fired hit each other, they were enough to tear each other to pieces. Bastard. Asterisk 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 the Germans. How many cannons have they assembled? They shouldn't have gathered all the cannons on the entire western frontier. Decapitaire, commander of the French Second Army Admiral Ennio complained. During this battle, the French army suffered a lot from the German artillery. But unfortunately, because of the urgency of the war, a large amount of weapons and equipment need to be produced. The 75mm field gun with more mature technology has become the first choice for French arsenals to produce. As for the large caliber heavy artillery that is urgently needed on the front line, the production quantity is very small. This also makes the French army on the front line, under the fierce German shelling. I can't hold my head up at all. Also very depressed, and those generals of the British Expeditionary Force. The British Army also attaches great importance to artillery. The number of cannons owned by each infantry division was still the largest in the world in the second half of last year, more than the number of cannons owned by each infantry division of the German army. However, after only half a year, they were completely surpassed by the German army. Behind the British and French allied forces, Marshal Zaiafei personally sat in the town and directed the battle. In his view, this attack by the German army is undoubtedly very threatening to the British and French allied forces. If it cannot withstand the German attack, the British and French allied forces may not be able to hold on to the Marne River defense line. Once the Marne River defense line is breached, then the German army will be able to directly threaten Paris. However, the battle had just begun, and the German army showed an extremely strong attack power, which made Marshal Zaiafei worried. Your Excellency Marshal, the front line requests more artillery support. Under the heavy shelling of the Germans, the artillery losses of the frontline departments are very large, a staff officer reported. Marshal Zaiafei frowned involuntarily. In his hands now, except for the artillery of the reserve teams of the two armies, he has no other artillery at all. He can't send the reserve teams to the front line just after they tell the front line that there is no extra artillery to support them. Now, the battle has just begun, right? Tell the front line that there is no extra artillery to support them. Now, the battle has just begun, and they need to rely on their own strength to hold the line of defense. Marshal Joffre ordered. Yes, Your Excellency the Marshal. The staff officer immediately went to send a telegram. God bless the French Republic. Marshal Joffre murmured. He knew that this battle was undoubtedly the final test for France. If it can withstand it, then France will be able to continue to maintain it. If you can't resist it, the collapse of France is just around the corner. However, under the well-prepared offensive of the German army, it is almost impossible for the British and French allied forces to resist the German attack on the Marne River. The artillery fire of the German army is still raging, and the artillery positions of the suppressed British and French allied forces have suffered heavy losses. What's more terrible is that the various air teams of the German army also actively participated in the attack on the artillery of the British and French coalition forces. At 9 o'clock in the morning, more than 200 fighter jets and bombers arrived at the front line. These fighter jets used machine guns to shoot the anti-aircraft firepower on the positions of the British and French allied forces, and covered the bombers for bombing. Who? Hoo. Hoo. Bombs fell from the bomber's magazine like dumplings, and the artillery positions of the British and French Allied forces were instantly shrouded in smoke and flames. After the smoke cleared, the artillery positions of the British and French Allied forces were in a mess. The cannons were blown up, and the artillery was gone. After the German Air Force joined in, the artillery losses of the British and French Allied forces began to rise sharply. Chapter 489, Passive Defense. A fighter jet of the German army is using an aviation machine gun to shoot at an artillery position of the British Expeditionary Force. The bullets are chasing the escaped British artillery. This kind of condescending attack from the air is generally difficult to escape. Suddenly, there was a burst of machine gun fire on the ground, and the bullets violently shot at the German fighter jets in the air. The fighter plane was hit, and several holes were punched in the skin on the wing. The frightened fighter immediately pulled up and fled quickly. The British and French Allied forces are not like the Russian army. Facing the German air attack, there is nothing they can do. With the technology of Britain and France, they can easily develop weapons for anti-aircraft shooting. When the German aircraft showed more and more powerful combat capabilities, the British and French Allied forces also deployed a large number of anti-aircraft machine guns to the front line as the main weapon to defend against German aircraft. When the fighter planes of Britain and France were unable to confront the German fighter planes, this was the only way to counterattack. Damn it, I almost shot down the German plane, a second lieutenant officer of the British Army said with some regret. However, soon he will no longer feel sorry, because the German fighter jet has gone and returned. After evading the British ground anti-aircraft fire, the German fighters began to counterattack. The order they received was originally to suppress the anti-aircraft firepower of the British and French coalition forces on the ground and provide cover for the bombing of the bombers. Now that the anti-aircraft firepower of the British Army has been discovered, it is natural to try our best to destroy it. In this way, it is also possible to ensure that one's own bombers will not be shot down when they drop bombs. The aviation machine guns of the German fighter jets fired, and the dense bullets fired at this anti-aircraft firepower point of the British Army. The bullets hit the shield of the anti-aircraft machine gun, making a tinkling sound, splashing sparks one by one. Several British machine gunners hid behind the shields, trembling with fright, for fear of being hit. When the German fighter jets passed over their heads, they finally breathed a sigh of relief. But when they turned their heads, they screamed in terror. At some point, the second lieutenant officer had already fallen to the ground. His head was even shattered. Obviously, during the German fighter jet attack just now, the second lieutenant officer was hit. The chief is dead. What should we do? A British soldier asked timidly. Let's run away. We will flee immediately. The German attack is too strong. We can't resist it at all. Another British soldier suggested. However, before they finished their discussion, German fighter jets attacked them again. This time, none of these British soldiers could escape. They were hit by the aviation machine gun bullets of the fighter jets and fell into a pool of blood. Although the ground anti-aircraft firepower of the British and French Allied forces fought back frantically, they still suffered heavy losses under the attack of fighter planes from the German Air Force. One artillery position after another was destroyed by the German Air Force, causing the artillery fire of the British and French Allied forces to suffer a heavy blow. Although the battle has only just begun. However, the situation on the entire battlefield was that the British and French Allied forces were completely suppressed. Not only did their fortifications suffer heavy losses under the heavy German shelling, but their artillery also suffered heavy losses under the German shelling and airstrikes. If this continues, no one knows how long the British and French Allied forces can last. The Air Force of the German Army dispatched more than 200 fighters at a time, taking turns to attack the positions and artillery of the British and French Allied forces, further increasing the losses of the British and French Allied forces. In less than half a day, the artillery of the British and French Allied forces suffered heavy losses, so that they had to disperse the artillery to avoid greater losses. The artillery of the British and French Allied forces withdrew from the battle with heavy losses, which made the German artillery no worries, and could use all their firepower to attack the fortifications of the British and French Allied forces. Under the heavy shelling of the German army, the fortifications of the British and French Allied forces were destroyed one after another. At the same time, Casualties are also increasing. Admiral Decazzetano, the commander of the French Second Army, rushed to the headquarters in person to report the loss to Marshal Joffre. Your Excellency the Marshal, the Second Army suffered heavy losses during the morning's shelling and bombing by the Germans. The fortifications we built in the past 6 months have lost 1/3 of the fortifications under the heavy shelling by the Germans. The loss of the artillery is as high as half. What's more terrible is that the German attack is still going on, and there is no meaning of ending at all. No one knows how long they will last. If this continues, there is no need to wait for the Germans to launch attack. Our troops may collapse first, Admiral Decazzetano said. Marshal Zaiaffi frowned tightly. Is it so serious? Your Excellency, Marshal, it will only be more serious than what I said. Admiral Decazzetano had a serious expression. Okay, General, I understand. But, do we have a way to deal with it now? Our artillery is less than half that of the Germans. Even if we send the artillery of the other two armies to the front, we can only the number of our artillery has reached 75% of the Germans. This still does not count the losses this morning. If the losses are included, I'm afraid it is still only half of the Germans. Under such circumstances, it is impossible to engage in artillery battles with the Germans. In that case, our artillery will only be lost faster. Therefore, let the soldiers hide in the anti-aircraft holes. The German bombardment cannot continue forever. The shells they need must be transported from the mainland of Germany to the front line. Such a large-scale consumption will definitely not last long, Marshal Zaiaffi said. If possible, he certainly hopes that the artillery of the British and French allied forces can launch a counterattack and defeat the German artillery in one fell swoop. But it's a pity that they don't have this ability at all. Instead of letting the artillery and artillery reported by one's own side be lost in the tragic artillery battle, it is better to order the artillery to hide, preserve their strength, and play a greater role at critical moments. Marshal Joffre believed that the German army would launch a crossing operation soon. At that time, the artillery they have preserved will undoubtedly play a greater role. Of course, this will have a great impact on the morale of the frontline troops. The enemy's shelling was fierce, but one's own artillery was misfired, which will inevitably bring more pressure to the soldiers. Chapter 490, Air Supremacy. Your Excellency Marshal, under the heavy bombardment of the Germans, even the strong anti-gun holes we built have been damaged to varying degrees, and some of the anti-gun holes have even collapsed. It is precisely because of this, so our losses are getting bigger and bigger. In addition, if the German bombardment continues, our fortifications will soon be lost. At that time, what will we use to resist the German attack? Decca Admiral Centeno looked aggrieved. General, even if there are no fortifications, we can still resist the German attack. Although the Marne River is not wide, I believe it will become an insurmountable natural moat for the Germans. At that time, we can use this natural moat, let the Germans shed blood. Marshal Joffre was not so easy to persuade. Of course, if possible, he naturally hopes to send more support to the front line. But it's a pity that he has nothing to do now. Okay, Marshal, we'll do our best. But, the German planes are so annoying. Why don't our planes take off to meet the enemy? If the Germans are attacking, they will also be constantly strafing or flying over our heads. If I drop bombs, I can't guarantee that my soldiers will lie in the trenches obediently and resist the German attack. Admiral Decazzetano continued. Marshal Joffre frowned immediately. The German planes were very powerful, which was not beyond his expectation. In fact, in the second half of last year, German planes hit the air forces of Britain and France, unable to parry. It's just that at that time, the number of German aircraft was still small, and their effects were limited, and they did not have much impact on the battle situation. But now, the German army is actually using aircraft on a large scale to bomb their defense lines, destroy their fortifications, and cause damage to their personnel. Under such circumstances, Marshal Zaiaffi naturally needs to pay attention. I will immediately order our air force to take off to meet the Germans. I hope our air force can resist them, Marshal Joffre said. Since its establishment, the number of aircraft owned by the French Air Force has also continued to rise. At the same time, the British Expeditionary Force also sent many fighter planes to France to assist in the war. Now, the total number of aircraft that the British and French allied forces can deploy exceeds 2,000. Moreover, these 2,000 aircraft are all fighter jets. It's just that, compared with the fighter jets of the German Air Force, the performance of the FAM and F-20 fighter jets, these two aircraft adopt a propulsive design and have two seats at the front and rear. The driver is in the back seat, and the observer, and equipped by the French Air Force, and the F-2B fighter jets equipped by the British Air Force are very poor. Shooter is in the front seat. They are generally equipped with 1 or 2 machine guns. However, although the aircraft with a push-in design is convenient for installing weapons and shooting, it has poor maneuverability and often cannot deal with the more flexible pull-in aircraft. When the British and French allied forces were frowning in the face of the fierce shelling and bombing of the German army, the generals of the German army were all smiling. "Your Highness, the fortifications of the British and French allied forces have been severely damaged by our shelling and bombing. When the attack in the afternoon is over, their fortifications will probably be completely destroyed. At that time, our infantry you can cross the Marne River very easily." Admiral Below smiled. Although large-scale shelling and bombing consumed a lot of combat materials, this makes the logistics pressure on the troops very high. But if it can effectively reduce the casualties of the troops, it is undoubtedly worthwhile. Well, for problems that can be solved with shells and bombs, the soldiers are absolutely not allowed to work hard. The life of every German soldier is extremely precious. We also hope to use these soldiers to occupy France, Britain, the whole of Europe, and even in the whole world. Qin Tian said with a smile. Your Highness is right. Our soldiers are the best soldiers in the world, and we need to minimize their casualties. Admiral Housen also echoed. In the eyes of these generals, a commander who cherishes the lives of soldiers is an excellent commander, and they understand why Qin Tian has such a high prestige in the army. It can be clearly seen from the munitions company under him that has developed a large number of advanced weapons, as well as his command philosophy during combat. Tomorrow morning, when the troops launch the crossing operation, let the aviation team also provide support. At that time, it will be able to further attack the British and French coalition forces and reduce the troops' mourning. Qin Tian said. For the German army, the biggest problem in launching this campaign was undoubtedly crossing the Marne River. It was also the battle that was most likely to cause the greatest casualties to the German army. This made Qin Tian have to think of various ways to reduce the casualties of the troops during the river crossing operation. Yes, Your Highness. Major General Manstein nodded. He was in charge of sending Qin Tian's orders to all ministries. In addition, let the aviation team pay attention. If there are planes from the British and French coalition forces in the sky, they must be beaten down. From the beginning to the end of this battle, this piece of sky belongs to the German Empire. Qin Tian deliberately said. In this era, perhaps no one cares more about the fight for air supremacy than Qin Tian. Although, the aircraft performance of this era is still very different from that of later generations. However, the importance of air supremacy has not changed at all. With air supremacy, not only can you use powerful air power to attack the enemy, but even the enemy's troop mobilization and logistical supplies are all in your own eyes. The side with air supremacy will undoubtedly be able to deploy troops more flexibly and use more reasonable tactics to deal with the enemy. Therefore, when Qin Tian commanded the troops to fight, he often made fighting for air supremacy the top priority of the troops. Yes, Your Highness. The air team is ready. Once the British and French coalition planes are spotted, they can launch an attack immediately. Major General Manstein replied. On the afternoon of March 31st, the German shelling and bombing continued. Although the force of the attack is not as strong as before, the target of the attack is more clear. With the help of the reconnaissance aircraft of the Air Force and the observation balloons of the artillery can be more purposeful when shelling, focusing on attacking the fortifications or firepower points of the British and French coalition forces that were not destroyed in the previous shelling. This shelling and bombing, similar to precision strikes, caused greater damage to the fortifications of the British and French allied forces. A large number of surviving fortifications and firing points were destroyed in shelling and bombing. Chapter 491. Devastated. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon on March 31st, when the 41st Fighter Brigade of the 4th Air Force was covering the mission of the 42nd Bomber Brigade, it suddenly noticed a large number of planes flying from the southern sky. Those planes, slow and clumsy. It is even more obviously different from the single-seat aircraft of the German army. I found the aircraft of the British and French coalition forces. I don't know if it is the French Farmant F-20 or the British F-2B. The captain of the 41st Fighter Battalion said, because the shapes of these two aircrafts are so similar. In the face of strong pressure from the German Air Force, Britain and France chose immediately. He took out the flare gun and fired the flare. The meaning of this signal flare is to let the bomber drop the bomb immediately and then evacuate. Although the German aircraft are more advanced than those of the Anglo-French allied forces. However, the bomber is undoubtedly very clumsy. It is obviously unwise to use bombers to deal with enemy fighters. After receiving the order, the bombers of the 42nd Bomber Group immediately dropped their bombs and then withdrew from the battlefield. At this time, they no longer care whether they can hit the target accurately. The most important thing is to evacuate the battlefield, free up the airspace and hand it over to fighter jets. After the bomber group began to evacuate, the captain of the 41st Fighter Group fired another flare. It means to get all the pilots of the fighter brigade ready for the battle. In the absence of radio miniaturization technology, the only way to command air combat is to use this old-fashioned method. Although a bit crude, it is sufficient. More than 40 F-2 fighter jets of the German army rushed towards the incoming enemy plane. Although the fleet dispatched by the British and French allied forces is as high as hundreds of aircraft, which is more than twice that of the German 41st Fighter Brigade. However, these pilots not only have no fear, but are full of fighting spirit. In an air battle, a large number of aircraft cannot win. The pilot's flying skills and the performance of the aircraft play the most critical role. In front of the pilots of the German army, these planes of the British and French allied forces were undoubtedly the targets of their massacre. The soldiers of the British and French allied forces on the ground couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief when they saw their own plane coming, and some even started to cheer. After all, the previous violent bombing by the German army cost them a lot. Kill the German planes, shoot them all down. Come on. Warriors of the British Empire, shoot down the German plane cleanly. The soldiers of the British and French allied forces on the ground even cheered for their own air force, hoping that they could defeat the German planes. After all, at least in terms of numbers, the fleet of the British and French coalition forces has an absolute advantage. Because of the distance of the battle, it was just over the south bank of the Marne River. On the German side, it can also be clearly seen. Boys of the German Empire, come on. Shoot down those French and British planes. Kill them, brave German pilots. The soldiers of the German army are also cheering for their own pilots. Even Qin Tian and other high-level German troops used binoculars to stare intently at the air battle that was about to break out. For the pilots on both sides, they couldn't see or hear the cheers on the ground. Now they have only one task, and that is to shoot down the opponent's plane and win the air battle. The F-2 fighter jets of the German army are very fast, with a maximum speed of more than 200 km per hour. This speed is much faster than the fighter jets equipped by Britain and France. This makes them often have a great advantage over you in battle. As the distance between the two sides got closer, the German F-2 fighter jets took the lead in climbing. Although Qin Tian is not a soldier, as a professional military enthusiast, he is undoubtedly very clear about some commonly used tactics. In the absence of precision-guided weapons, the most common tactic in air combat is undoubtedly to climb, seize the altitude, then dive to attack, then climb again, and then launch an attack, and so on. Especially when dealing with enemy aircraft with poor maneuverability, such tactics are very effective. Even in another time and space, the Japanese-style Zero battle with excellent dogfighting ability was defeated under such tactics. The plane that fought the German army was the French Air Force. The Farmand F-20 fighter jets they cannot compare with the German F-2 fighter jets in performance. However, after seeing the German planes begin to climb, they immediately followed suit. But because of the difference in climb rate, they fell far behind. Comparing our climb with us is simply asking for trouble. Our aircraft is the most advanced aircraft in the world, a German pilot said disdainfully, after looking down at the French aircraft. Sure enough, as the altitude got higher and higher, the performance of the French aircraft became more and more difficult. Some aircraft even had power failures because of the high altitude. After the engine stopped, they fell directly from high altitude to the ground. Boom. 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 Several French planes fell to the ground and exploded. The soldiers on both sides were stunned. My god. What's going on? Why did our plane fall down by itself? Haha. The French plane is too bad, isn't it? It fell down like this. How could they fight us? The German soldiers were already cheering. Qin Tian also had a smile on the corner of his mouth and felt a sense of accomplishment in his heart. With his help, the German army equipped the world's most advanced aircraft. Now, these advanced aircraft are helping Germany gain an advantage on the battlefield and win the war step by step. Facing the plane that was climbing continuously, the French Air Force was powerless and had to stop the climb. If they continue to climb, I'm afraid that all their fighter planes will have to fall. It's just that the German pilots would not let this opportunity go and immediately launched an attack. Dozens of aircraft attacked from high altitude and aviation machine guns started firing. Dense aviation machine gun bullets shot towards the French aircraft below. The powerful bullets easily penetrated the wooden body and skin of the French aircraft, leaving large holes in the body. There were even some French aircraft that were directly broken up and fell from a high altitude. In this era, except for the German pilots from other countries are not equipped with parachutes, which means that, after they are shot down twice, there is only one consequence, that is, they are directly smashed into meatloaf. Under this round of attacks by German aircraft, more than a dozen French aircraft were shot down. Chapter 492, Heavy Damage. The German pilots fully utilized the performance of their own aircraft. They were flying planes, chasing and killing these planes of the French army. After an F-2 fighter bit the French army's farmed F-20 fighter jet, it opened fire immediately, pouring a string of bullets from the aviation machine gun into the tail of the French army's F-20 aircraft. The structure of the wooden body is so fragile that the tail of this French military aircraft was torn to pieces immediately. Afterwards, the French aircraft plummeted into the ground with billowing smoke, and the 2 pilots were all killed. God, why are these German planes so fast? They are much faster than our planes. A French pilot shouted in horror. Yeah. Compared with the German aircraft we fought against last year, these aircraft seem to be more advanced. The observer and shooter sitting in the front seat also agreed. Although the aircraft equipped by the German Air Force are still F-2 fighters, they are also constantly improving. In particular, the shape and structure are constantly being optimized, and the engine is also being updated, enabling the aircraft to have greater speed and maneuverability. Under such circumstances, the aircraft equipped by Britain and France were naturally thrown farther and farther by the German aircraft. God, there is a German plane overhead. The observer and shooter yelled in horror. The pilot looked up immediately, just in time to see a German plane coming towards them from the sky. He immediately piloted the plane, trying to escape. However, it was too late. The German plane has already opened fire. The aviation machine guns of the German aircraft began to fire, and the bullets directly hit the cockpit of the French aircraft. Aircraft in this era do not have a glass cockpit, and the pilot is directly exposed to the outside. The bullets of the aviation machine gun easily killed the pilots and observers on the French aircraft. After losing its pilot, the plane plummeted to the ground, hitting the ground, and exploding in a ball of fire. Facing the attack of the German planes, the French planes had no power to fight back. The entire air battle has shown a one-sided situation. The planes of the French army were shot down one after another, like burning firebirds, falling to the ground continuously. In contrast to the German aircraft, although some were shot down, however, the number is very small. Often, more than 10 French aircraft were shot down, and only 1 German aircraft was shot down. Such a battle loss ratio is undoubtedly very large. The pilots of both sides watching the battle on the ground were undoubtedly stunned. Usually, those pilots who wear handsome uniforms, receive generous salaries, and enjoy the best food are undoubtedly the objects of their envy. But, now it seems, that they are not so good. Once shot down, there will be no bones left. Of course, the ones with no bones left mainly refer to the pilots of the French Air Force and the pilots of the German Army. As long as they were not killed on the spot in an air battle, they would choose to parachute. Compared with airplanes, these pilots are the most precious wealth. However, because the fighting area is located in the sky above the British and French coalition forces, once those pilots parachute, they are likely to fall into the control area of the British and French coalition forces. In that case, they will obviously not end well. Therefore, these pilots often choose to continue flying the plane after being hit, and then parachute, until they fly to the north bank of the Marne River. Only in this way can their safety be guaranteed. After all, in the previous battles, it was not without pilots, who were directly killed by the enemy, after being captured by the enemy. Although, some pilots who were shot down inevitably suffered casualties. However, on the whole, the casualties of the German army were much smaller than those of the French army. Watching our own planes being shot down one after another, the morale of the British and French allied forces continued to drop. Marshal Joffre, commander-in-chief of the French army, was also watching the battle in the sky. However, as the planes of the French army were continuously shot down, his complexion couldn't help turning black like the bottom of a pot. Oh my god. Is there such a big gap between our aircraft performance and the Germans? Marshal Joffre couldn't believe such a result. You know, in order to ensure victory, he mobilized hundreds of fighter jets to participate in the battle. However, with less than half of the number of German aircraft, they directly made them pay such a heavy loss, which Marshal Zayefeli never thought of before. Your Excellency Marshal, the performance of the German aircraft is indeed more advanced than ours. However, the Farmand Company is already developing a newer Farmand F-30 fighter jet. By that time, we will definitely have an aircraft that is not inferior to the Germans. Yes, said a French Air Force general. Farmand F-30 fighter jet? What's the use of that? What I want is an aircraft that can fight against the German aircraft now, Marshal Joffre said angrily. Suddenly, the generals fell silent and said nothing. Obviously, the result of the current battle made them all very ashamed. It's just that they have no other way to do it. Who made them not only seriously inferior to the German army in the performance of their aircraft, but also seriously inferior to the German army in the quality of their pilots. So if it is like this, there is no other way. Give me an order to mobilize more planes to the front, and we must defeat the Germans. Marshal Joffre ordered. This is the only way he can think of. Since the performance is not good, he can only make up for it with the advantage of quantity. Marshal Zayefeli also saw that during the air battle, some German planes were still shot down. This also means that the German aircraft is not immune to being shot down. As long as they have the opportunity, or if the conditions are ripe, they can also shoot down the German planes. Yes, Your Excellency the Marshal. The battle in the sky will soon end. The German 41st Fighter Group, with the loss of 5 aircraft, shot down more than 70 French aircraft. Seeing that the situation was not good, the rest of the French planes fled away one after another. Otherwise, the results of the German Air Force would be even greater. However, even so, the French army did not admit defeat easily. On the afternoon of March 31st, many battles broke out between the two sides in the airspace on the south bank of the Marne River. The French army dispatched a large number of fighter planes in an attempt to prevent the German army from bombing the French defense line. In the fierce air battle this afternoon, the German army lost more than 50 fighter planes. The number of fighter planes lost by the French army is even more. According to preliminary statistics, they also lost more than 600 planes. This is definitely a serious blow to the newly established French Air Force. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 493, Attack Preparation. The heavy losses of the French Air Force also made Marshal Joffre give up the idea of competing with the German army for air supremacy. With such a large battle loss ratio between the two sides, even if all the strength of the French Air Force is lost, it is probably not the opponent of the German army. Without the interference of the French Air Force, the German Air Force also fully joined the bombing of the French positions. By the evening of March 31st, the 100-kilometer-long French defense line was almost plowed by the German artillery shells and bombs. There is almost no intact place in the entire position. There are bombed trenches and scattered barbed wire everywhere. Many of the landmines that were originally planted were detonated during the shelling and bombing, and obviously they would not be able to play any role in the ensuing battle. The firepower points built by the French army on the position are even more rare. Even the strongest anti-blasting holes that were built, many of them were bombed down. During the shelling and bombing of the German army on this day alone, the British and French allied forces on the entire defense line suffered tens of thousands of casualties. This is also the reason why the British and French allied forces withdrew their main forces from the frontline positions after the battle began. Otherwise, their casualties will definitely increase exponentially. The effect is not bad. The defense line of the British and French allied forces is already dilapidated. Even if they rush to repair it tonight, it is impossible to build a solid defense line. Tomorrow morning, another hour of bombardment will almost launch the attack. BLUO General Housen, Your Excellency the Duke, it will be up to you tomorrow. Qin Tian said. Yes, Your Highness. All three legion commanders replied. After a whole day of firepower preparations, the German army almost destroyed the defense lines of the British and French allied forces. This will undoubtedly reduce a lot of pressure for tomorrow's offense. Among other things, the casualties of the troops must be effectively controlled. Therefore, Admiral Below and others were very satisfied. Of course, in order to do all this, the German artillery was exhausted. The pilots thought that they were exhausted after fighting continuously. However, after a night's rest, they had to continue fighting tomorrow. At least until the German army broke through the Marne River defense line of the British and French allied forces, they could really relax. Your Highness, the position of the Anglo-French coalition forces on the opposite side has been almost destroyed. Tomorrow we will definitely be able to cross the Marne River and tear apart the defense lines of the British and French coalition forces. The Duke of Württemberg said. Well, but still don't take it lightly. After all, there are more than 1 million British and French allied troops on the other side of the river. Qin Tian nodded. If he was facing more than 1 million Russian troops, Qin Tian would naturally not be worried. But the British and French allied forces are different. Their combat effectiveness is much stronger than that of the Russian army. Yes, Your Highness. The Duke of Württemberg replied, but the expression on his face obviously didn't care. The Duke of Württemberg is not only the commander of the 4th Army of the German Army, but also the Grand Duke of the Kingdom of Württemberg. He has a high position in the entire German Empire. Even William II treated him with courtesy. In front of him, Qin Tian, the Crown Prince of the Empire, was nothing more than a junior. The Duke of Württemberg disdained Qin Tian as the commander of the Western Front. Of course, with Qin Tian's current status, the Duke of Württemberg would certainly not offend him. However, it is an indisputable fact that he has a close relationship with Crown Prince William. Everyone, get ready. Tomorrow's battle will be our real test, Qin Tian said. Yes, Your Highness. April 1st. Today is April Fool's Day. However, people in the middle of the war have no time to take care of this festival. The two sides in the war are looking forward to doing their best to defeat the opponent. After dawn, the German army could observe that the positions of the British and French allied forces on the opposite bank had been repaired. It's just that, compared with the solid position before, the position built hastily overnight is undoubtedly much simpler. Presumably, the soldiers of the British and French coalition forces didn't even sleep last night. At 8 o'clock in the morning, the German artillery started shelling again. More than 5,000 cannons once again used powerful artillery fire to pour shells on the positions of the British and French allied forces. The fortifications rebuilt with great difficulty by the British and French allied forces were once again destroyed by the fierce German shelling. I don't know how many soldiers of the British and French allied forces would scold the German army for this. Everyone knows that after yesterday's heavy shelling, the German army will definitely launch an attack today. After those fortifications were destroyed, how did this allow them to resist the German attack? God damn the Germans, how many times are they planning to destroy our position? Marshal Lion Zayafei couldn't help but scolded the Germans. It can be seen that the German army's violent bombardment regardless of cost has given them what a loss. Order the troops on the front line to prepare for battle. This time, the German bombardment will definitely not last long. Marshal Joffre ordered. After all, the high-intensity shelling, like yesterday, would consume a terrible amount of shells. Marshal Joffre did not believe that the German army would store so many shells. Besides, you can't just shoot all the shells at the beginning of the battle. In that case, how will the follow-up battle continue? In addition, the artillery has been firing at a high intensity, which is obviously unstoppable. Yes, Your Excellency the Marshal. In fact, the frontline commanders of the British and French Allied forces also knew that the German army would probably launch an attack today without the order from Marshal Joffre. Therefore, they also prepared for battle early in the morning. Though their fortifications were destroyed, the soldiers were also very tired, but they are still very confident in resisting the German attack. After all, there is the Marne River, and if the German army wants to attack them, they need to cross the river first. It also takes a certain amount of time for a river surface that is tens of meters wide. During this time, it happened to be the time when they gave full play to their powerful firepower and caused great damage to the German army. Maybe we can take this opportunity to inflict heavy damage on the German army and let their blood dye the water of the Marne River red. The shelling of the German army is still continuing, and the artillerymen are struggling to smash the shells one after another into the positions of the British and French coalition forces on the opposite bank. On the frontline positions of the German army, the infantry had already had breakfast and were resting. The quartermaster has distributed the ammunition, and soon it will be their turn to attack. At the rear airport, the 4 air teams of the German army are all ready to take off. They are about to take off to provide fire support for the attack infantry. Chapter 494, Crossing the River. The time passed by 1 minute and 1 second, and it will be 8 o'clock in the morning in 5 minutes. When will the aviation team arrive at the battlefield? Qin Tian asked. Your Highness, each of the 4 air teams have dispatched a fighter brigade and a bomber brigade, and the planes have already taken off. Calculate the time. They should not be far from the battlefield, and they will arrive at the battlefield in a few minutes at most. Manstein Major General Yan reported. In order to minimize the casualties caused by the troops when crossing the Marne River, and to ensure that the crossing operation can successfully break through the defense lines of the British and French Allied forces, the German army has made careful planning. Not only has adequate firepower preparation has been made, but it is also planned that when crossing the river, the fighter planes of the Air Force can fly in time to support. In this case, it can undoubtedly effectively reduce the casualties of the troops. Qin Tian nodded. We are ready for what we should do. Next, it's up to the warriors. I hope God can bless us. Your Highness, we will definitely win this time. Major General Manstein was convinced of this. When the hour hand on the watch pointed to 8 o'clock, the German bombardment began to extend to the deep positions of the British and French Allied forces. At the same time, on the front line, mortars, grenade launchers, and light and heavy machine guns were set up door by door, ready to fire at any time. More German soldiers, carrying the boats that had been prepared long ago, rushed to the Marne River. Although the Marne is not wide, the river is not deep. However, if you want to wade directly across the river, it will undoubtedly be very difficult. Therefore, in the past 2 months, the engineers of the German army have prepared a large number of small boats for the army to use to cross the river in advance. The British and French Allied forces on the other side of the river also noticed the change in the German shelling. Quick, enter the position. The Germans are about to attack. The officers of the British and French Allied forces ordered loudly. A large number of soldiers of the British and French Allied forces drilled out of the anti-gun holes and entered the position, preparing to resist the German attack. At the same time, soldiers deployed in the rear also moved to the front line through the communication trenches. It's just that the soldiers of these British and French Allied forces must first go through the German artillery blockade. Under the fierce shelling of the German army, it is unknown how many soldiers of the British and French Allied forces died under the heavy shelling of the German army before reaching the front line. Your Excellency, the German attack has begun. A general reported to Marshal Joffre. May God bless the French Republic, and hope that we can resist the German attack. Marshal Joffre closed his eyes and prayed to God. On the front line of the Marne River, the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th armies of the German Central Group launched an attack on the positions of the British and French coalition forces on a line of defense that was hundreds of kilometers long. In the first wave of offensive, the German army chose 6 landing points and invested as many as 150,000 people to launch the attack. This is not counting the troops who provide fire support for them on the ground. Fire. Following the order of the frontline commander, the German defense line began to shoot violently. A bunch of heavy machine guns, light machine guns, mortars, and grenades all began to fire crazily at the positions of the British and French coalition forces on the other side of the river. Intensive artillery shells slammed into the positions of the British and French coalition forces like rain, and many shells fell directly into the trenches, causing heavy losses to the British and French coalition forces who hurried into the trenches. The dense machine gun bullets hit the soldiers of the British and French allied forces, so that they couldn't even raise their heads. Everyone could only shrink their heads into the trenches and act as turtles. No matter how scolded by the officers, they were unwilling to stick their heads out to fight. After all, those bodies that have fell in the trenches and are still warm are the best role models. Cowards, you cowards, raise your heads and fire. Otherwise, the Germans will fight across the Marne River. At that time, everyone will have a dead end. A French second lieutenant officer scolded loudly, but the next second, his roar stopped abruptly. A stray bullet hit his head and shattered his entire head, just like a watermelon shattered. On the north bank of the Marne, many German soldiers have rushed down the Marne carrying wooden boats. These tall German soldiers can carry a small wooden boat with 2 people. After the wooden boat was placed on the river, the soldiers jumped on it immediately, then vigorously rowed the oars and rushed to the other side of the river. The Marne River is only a few tens of meters wide, and the current is not too fast. If there is no disturbance, the river can be crossed in a minute. Although facing the powerful firepower of the German army, there are still many soldiers of the British and French allied forces resisting. Especially those firepower points that were not destroyed by the German shelling and bombing, began to shoot violently. Da. The French Hotchkiss machine guns and the British Brent machine guns deployed in the firepower point were all firing. The dense bullets hit the river surface, splashing one after another. The small wooden boat has almost no defense. Once the wooden hull is hit, it will be easily pierced. Therefore, many German soldiers were hit by bullets from the British and French allied forces and fell into the Marne Hanoi screaming. Their bodies flowed down the river and finally flowed to the Seine and then to Paris. Blood flowed from these corpses, staining the waters of the Marne red. Fire and destroy the French firepower. A German officer ordered a 120mm heavy mortar aimed at a French bunker on the other side of the river. Boom. Boom. 2 shells flew out. Although one shell missed, it fell into the trench and killed many French soldiers. Another shell hit the French bunker and blew up the whole bunker. The German soldiers are undoubtedly the most vulnerable when they are crossing the river. Facing the fierce firepower of the British and French allied forces, they could only bear it silently. At this time, there is no doubt that they can only count on the firepower from the rear, which can suppress the firepower of the British and French coalition forces and provide them with protection. Order the artillery to fire immediately. French Second Army Commander General Decazes-Tourneau ordered with a dark face. The firepower of the German army is very strong, beyond their expectations. So much so that their line of defense was completely suppressed by the powerful firepower of the German army. If there is no other way, the German army will rush across the Marne River. At that time, it will be even more difficult to drive the German army into the river, although the battle has only just begun. But in order to stabilize the line of defense, Admiral Decazes-Tourneau had no choice but to dispatch the artillery that had been hidden before. Almost all the other British and French coalition armies have issued such orders. The German attack brought great pressure to them. Chapter 495. Tragic. On the position of the French army, a series of 75mm field guns and a small number of 105mm howitzers were pulled out again and deployed to the position. The artillery battle between the two sides yesterday, as well as the bombing of the German Air Force, caused heavy losses to the French artillery. Now, in order to strengthen the defense of the front line, they also have to pull these artillery out again. Fire. Under the command of the commander, the artillery of the French army started shelling. One after another, the shells slammed into the Marne River and the German defense line on the north bank of the Marne River. Boom. Boom. The shell exploded in the Marne River, splashing a high column of water. The rate of fire advantage of the French 75mm field gun was brought into play. Although the artillery fire of the French army suffered heavy losses, the artillery fire was still very strong. Shells continued to fall into the Marne River, and the German troops who were crossing the river were inevitably shelled. Even the shells of the 75mm field gun are not very powerful. However, that is definitely not something that wooden boats can resist. Boom. A small boat was hit, and the hull was instantly torn apart. The German soldiers on board also suffered heavy casualties and fell into the river. On the German position, a heavy machine gun that was firing was hit. The machine gunner was killed on the spot, and the machine gun was also blown into parts. The fierce shelling of the French army caused the German army to pay a lot of casualties. At the same time, it also eased the pressure on the defense line of the British and French Allied forces, allowing the soldiers of the British and French Allied forces who were suppressed to poke their heads out and pour firepower on the German troops who were crossing the river, further increasing the casualties of the German troops. Seeing this scene, Qin Tian couldn't help frowning. Order the artillery to suppress the artillery of the British and French Allied forces. Why hasn't the aviation team arrived yet? Qin Tian asked. Your Highness, the aviation team should be arriving soon, Major General Manstein said. The artillery of the German army once again began to suppress the artillery of the British and French Allied forces, providing fire support for their own infantry. It's just that the artillery of the British and French Allied forces seemed to be desperate. They ignored the shells falling from the sky and just fired desperately, as if they wanted to shoot as many shells as possible before being killed by German shells. Boom. Boom. Two consecutive 150mm artillery shells fell on the artillery positions of the French army. This artillery position with 6 75mm field guns was blown up like a typhoon passing through the border. Several field artillery were blown up, and those artillerymen suffered heavy casualties. At the same time, the German Air Force finally arrived on the battlefield. Fighters and bombers rushed directly towards the artillery positions of the French army. Among the attack targets of the Air Force, attacking the enemy's artillery is always the first. The aviation machine guns of the fighter jets fired, and many French soldiers fell to the ground screaming. The bomber lowered its altitude, opened the magazine, and bombs fell like raindrops one after another, instantly destroying an artillery position of the British and French coalition forces. Although, the anti-aircraft machine guns of the British and French Allied forces fired crazily, trying to drive these fighters away. But their firing often had no results at all, except for attracting more violent attacks from the German army. There were very few German fighter planes destroyed by the anti-aircraft firepower of the British and French forces. Under the joint attack of the German artillery and air force, the artillery of the British and French Allied forces was suppressed. The casualties they caused to the German infantry who were crossing the river were also very limited. Without the interference of artillery from the British and French Allied forces, the German infantry crossed the river faster. A wooden boat rushed to a place not far from the south bank of the Marne River, but the oncoming bullets smashed the entire wooden boat into a sieve, and the German soldiers in the small wooden boat suffered heavy casualties. Manstein, the defense of wooden boats is too bad. The next time there is a similar battle, wrap a layer of iron on the wooden boat. It doesn't matter if it can withstand the enemy's shelling, as long as it can withstand machine gun fire, then that's good too. Seeing that the casualties of his own soldiers began to soar, Qin Tian couldn't help but sighed. Yes, Your Highness. Major General Manstein nodded. Although doing it according to Qin Tian's request would result in an increase in cost and man hours, but if it can reduce the casualties of the troops, these are all worth it. The fierce battle continued, and the casualties on both sides continued to rise. However, judging from the situation on the battlefield, the British and French coalition forces still suffered the greater casualties. When the firepower is completely at a disadvantage and the fortifications are almost destroyed, it is naturally difficult for them to resist the German attack. A small German boat rushed to the south bank of the Marne River. The soldiers just jumped off the boat when they were shot by the French army. A Hotchkiss heavy machine gun fired at them frantically. The small boat were beaten into a sieve and fell on the river beach. But the next moment, the heavy machine gun of the French army was destroyed. An F-2 fighter jet skimmed the trenches of the British and French Allied forces, and the aviation machine fired guns wildly. Immediately, the coalition soldiers in the trench were beaten into sieves, and many fell to the ground after being shot. Although the British and French allied forces tried their best to prevent the German army from crossing the Marne River. However, the narrow Marne River is not a natural barrier after all. More and more small boats rushed to the south bank of the Marne River. The German soldiers jumped off the boat, lying on the river beach, and fired at the British and French allied forces. However, because they are at a disadvantage in terms of strength, they are often suppressed. Whizzing bullets fly overhead. If you don't pay attention, you may be blown in the head. This is undoubtedly a great test for human will. Many German soldiers could only hold their heads, lying on the ground, praying not to be hit. Grenade, destroy the French machine gun. An officer ordered. A grenadier was set up immediately, but before it could fire, it was vented by the French machine gun, and a shuttle of bullets came over, immediately smashing the grenadier into a sieve. But then, the substitute grenadier opened fire immediately, and a grenade accurately hit the machine gun, destroying it. More and more small boats rushed to the south of the Marne River. With the support of their own fierce firepower, the German soldiers began to gain a firm foothold on the south bank of the Marne River, and even began to use their weapons to shoot at the German army. Both sides come and go, fighting with great joy. However, the brutality of this battle has not changed at all. The two sides were on the south bank of the Marne River, and blood flowed like a river. Whether it is the German army or the British and French allied forces, they have paid great casualties. Chapter 496, Pontoon. A general-purpose German machine gun was firing at the French position. The dense bullets made the French soldiers defending this line of defense completely unable to raise their heads, and could only shrink in the trenches. After several opportunities, several small boats successfully rushed to the river beach on the south bank of the Marne River, and almost a platoon of soldiers successfully crossed the river. They lay on the river beach, further suppressing the French army's position, and creating conditions for the subsequent troops to cross the river. As more and more German soldiers crossed the Marne River, they gradually established a solid beachhead on the south bank of the Marne River, and tentatively launched an attack on the French army's position, trying to tear through the French army's defense line. The French army's line of defense is too close to the Marne River. If they can't break through their first line of defense, it is almost impossible for the engineers to erect a pontoon bridge. They will suffer heavy casualties under the firepower of the French army. Therefore, the German army needs to break through another line of defense of the French army and establish a solid position before the engineers can be dispatched. Boom, boom, boom. On the German positions, mortars and grenades of various calibers were firing to provide fire support for the German soldiers who had successfully crossed the river. The shells fell on the French army's position like raindrops, causing heavy losses to the French army stationed on this line of defense. Your Highness, the soldiers fought very hard, and the casualties were relatively heavy. However, it was within our expectations. I believe that the casualties of the French will definitely not be much smaller than ours. When we cross the river, more and more troops, the more they have, the more they will be able to attack the defense lines of the British and French allied forces, and take their defense lines in one fell swoop. Major General Manstein said. Qin Tian nodded. Well, let the engineers get ready. Once we take down the first line of defense of the British and French allied forces, we will immediately start building the pontoon bridge. Using small boats to transport soldiers was too slow after all, and at the same time, under the firepower of the French, the losses were also great. If weapons can be built, soldiers and various combat materials can directly cross the river. In that case, the efficiency will be greatly improved. After spending a little more time, let the engineers build a pontoon bridge that can pass tanks, and they can directly use armored troops to assault the defense lines of the British and French allied forces. Qin Tian believed that the British and French allied forces would absolutely be unable to withstand their attack. Yes, Your Highness. Major General Manstein replied. In this battle, crossing the Marne River is the most critical battle. As long as the Marne River is hit, the problem is easily solved. The armored forces will rampage on the French land and completely beat the British and French allied forces to the ground. The battle continued, and the German army and the British and French allied forces fought desperately on the south bank of the Marne River. Although the British and French allied forces have a great advantage in strength, However, they suffered heavy losses under the attack of the German army. Even the line of their defense held on to became precarious. Marshal Zayafei, who was sitting in the rear, was also very nervous after learning of the predicament at the front. The battle has only started for half a day. Are they about to lose the first line of defense? At this speed, the line of defense they built on the south bank of the Marne River would not last for a few days in total. Once the Marne River defense line fell, the German army could not be stopped in the future. At that time, the German army will probably fight all the way to Paris. In that case, France will be finished. Marshal, the first line positions of the several armies on the front line have suffered heavy losses. They have already started to use the reserves. But even so, it is not known how long they can last. A French general reported to Marshal Joffre, "Tell the frontline departments that the battle has just begun. The two army groups serving as reserves cannot be used. They must find their own way to resist the German attack." Marshal Zayafei said, although he prepared two group armies and a reserve force of more than 400,000 people for the coalition forces on the front line. However, it is not possible to invest a large number of reserves at the beginning of the battle, right? In that case, how can this battle continue? Yes, Your Excellency Marshal. The general nodded and immediately went to convey the order. Oh. After the general left, Marshal Zayafei couldn't help but sighed. Those Germans, after half a year of rest, have their strength become so strong? The four frontline armies, with more than 800,000 people, couldn't hold on shortly after the battle started. If this is the case, how can it be possible? Marshal Zayafei became even more worried about the upcoming battle situation. Although, compared with half a year ago, the British and French allied forces are stronger. But obviously, the progress of the German army is greater than theirs. In this case, it would be even more impossible for the British and French allied forces to resist the German attack or to defeat the German army. French Second Army Command, Admiral Decazes-Tourneau is in a state of desperation. The fierce attack of the German army caused great losses to the Second Army. The front line of defense is even more precarious. On the more than 20-kilometer defense line in charge of the Second Army, the infantry army he deployed had suffered more than half of its casualties. If the deployment dispatched another infantry army to replace it in time, the line of defense would have been breached long ago. General, a telegram from the headquarters. A staff officer reported to Admiral Decazes-Tourneau. Admiral Decazes-Tourneau took the telegram and looked at it, and his face immediately became even uglier. Damn it, let us figure out a way for ourselves. Are we going to lose all of my Second Army here? Then, how will this battle go on? Admiral Decazes-Tourneau said dissatisfied. I'm very dissatisfied with this order of Marshal Zayafei. However, he has no choice but to issue stricter orders to the frontline troops, asking them to stick to their positions. The French have never been people who will fight to the end. In the case of heavy losses, the fighting will of many French soldiers is already very fragile. On the afternoon of April 1st, the German Second Army took the lead in breaking through the first line of defense of the French Second Army. The French army, which suffered heavy casualties, retreated to the second line of defense. The Second Army Corps of the German army launched an attack on the second line of defense of the French army, while dispatching engineers to start building pontoon bridges. By the evening of April 1st, the first line of defense of the British and French coalition forces on the south bank of the Marne River had been broken by the Germans one after another. The German army has established a solid position on the south bank of the Marne River. The engineers and soldiers of each legion began to move and began to build pontoon bridges. Be prepared for the subsequent rapid crossing of the main force and combat supplies. For engineers, it is very easy to build a pontoon bridge on a river tens of meters wide, and it can be completed in at most 2 hours. Chapter 497, Counterattack. Your Highness, the pontoon bridge of the 2nd Legion has already started to be built. In an hour, the first pontoon bridge will be built successfully. By then, our main force will be able to cross the Marne River and participate in the attack on the British and French coalition forces. General Below, commander of the 2nd Corps, looked excited. Originally, they expected that this time the Battle of the Marne would cause heavy losses to the troops again. But unexpectedly, the Marne River defense line of the British and French allied forces did not cause them much trouble. Under the onslaught of the German army, it can now be regarded as a successful crossing of the river. Next, it is only necessary to build a pontoon bridge and send more troops to the south bank of the Marne River, and then the British and French allied forces can be defeated according to the predetermined plan. Your Highness, the pontoon bridge of the Third Army has also begun to be built. Soon, our main force will be able to cross the river, Major General Hausen, the commander of the Third Army, said. Immediately, the Duke of Württemberg, commander of the Fourth Army, also stated that at most at night, their main force could also cross the river. Qin Tian is also very happy. Judging from the current situation, the development of the war situation is very beneficial to the German army. Although, the official attack has only just begun the first day. However, the German army has achieved great results in today's offensive. The Marne River defense line painstakingly built by the British and French allied forces seemed vulnerable to the German attack. Of course, all of this is based on the fact that the German army used strong fire support when they attacked. Not only assembled a large number of heavy artillery, but also received the support of a large number of aircraft. Directly in terms of firepower, the British and French allied forces were severely damaged, and their fortifications were blown to pieces. And relying on strong firepower to support the infantry to cross the river, thus breaking through the first line of defense of the British and French allied forces. Without the half-year preparations of the German army, which greatly strengthened the firepower of the troops, none of this would have been possible. In addition, the consumption of logistics supplies is also an astronomical figure. Although the German army paid a high price for this, in Qin Tian's view, it was all worth it. As long as the British and French allied forces can be defeated, and the war won, then all efforts will be rewarded. Well, generals. Next, we need to prevent the counterattack of the British and French allied forces. They will not be willing to let us break through the defense line like this. Once our main force crosses the Marne River, they will not be able to resist it at all. Qin Tian reminded Rode. Yes, Your Highness. All three legion commanders replied. Floating bridges appeared on the Marne River with the efforts of German engineers. The German soldiers of the brigade passed the pontoon bridge smoothly and arrived at the south bank of the Marne River. They immediately invested in the attack on the defense line of the British and French allied forces, which made the British and French allied forces feel more pressure. The situation on the battlefield has become more and more unfavorable to the British and French allied forces. Admiral Decazes Tourneur, commander of the 2nd French Army, Robert George Neville, commander of the 4th Army, General Charles D'Este, commander of the 6th Army, 2nd Army of the British Expeditionary Force. The commander, Admiral Roy, rushed to the headquarters to report the unfavorable situation on the front line to Marshal Joffre. Marshal, our first line position has been lost. The second line position has begun to be attacked by the Germans. Now, the Germans are crossing the river in a big way. Once they successfully cross the river, our pressure will be even greater. At that time, our defense line is very likely to be completely broken by the Germans. Admiral Roy said with a dark face. Marshal Joffre's complexion is also very ugly. The 4 armies on the front line, more than 800,000 people, can't even last a day. If so, how can this battle go on? Gentlemen, this is only the first day of the German offensive. Could it be that we can't resist it? If that's the case, we should simply withdraw from the Marne River defense line. Marshal Joffre said angrily. Your Excellency Marshal, although the Germans only started their offensive today, their firepower preparations started yesterday. Under the powerful German artillery fire and aircraft bombing, our defense line has been destroyed. The soldiers had to fight fiercely with the Germans within the dilapidated defense line, and it was the result of their desperation to be able to persist until this point. Admiral Roy was a little dissatisfied. He obviously couldn't accept Marshal Joffre's accusation. Several other French generals were also somewhat dissatisfied, but they were not easy to argue with their immediate superiors. Admiral Roy is the army commander of the British Expeditionary Force, so there is no need to worry about this. Yes, Marshal. When our soldiers were fighting, the German planes were still hovering over their heads. I don't know how many soldiers were killed by the German planes. Under such circumstances, it is naturally difficult for us to resist the German attack. Admiral Decazes Tourneur also said. Okay, what do you want to do? Evacuate the Marne River defense line. The Marne River defense line is already our best line of defense. If you abandon this place, then from here to Paris, there will be no danger to Marshall. Of course we will not ask to evacuate the Marne. What is the difference between that and surrendering to the Germans? Given the fierce German offensive, we hope to get more defend reinforcement to launch a counterattack against the Germans and drive them off. Go to the river and rush back to the north bank of the Marne. Otherwise, we won't last long at all. Admiral Royce said. Is it necessary to put the 8th and 9th armies into battle now? Everyone should think about it. These two armies are the last reserves in our hands. Marshal Ziafen's face was livid. Marshal, if the German attack can be repelled, then the 8th Army and the 9th Army can immediately withdraw to rest and continue to serve as the reserve team. If the German attack cannot be repelled, then it seems that it is necessary to keep a strong reserve force. It's useless. Admiral Royce said. Marshal Ziafe thought about it and finally accepted the suggestion. Indeed, the strength of the German army is so strong, if it can't even hold on to the front line of defense, it is meaningless to keep a strong reserve team. After some discussions, the French army decided to invest in the reserves of the two armies tomorrow morning to launch an attack on the German army crossing the Marne River, driving the German army back to the north of the Marne River in one fell swoop. The four group armies on the front line will also invest in the main force in this counterattack and fight the German army to the death. Chapter 498. Desperate. On the night of April 1st, the main forces of the German 2nd Army, 3rd Army and 4th Army had crossed the Marne River. On the hundreds of kilometers of river, German engineers successively built more than 20 pontoon bridges. The appearance of these pontoon bridges allowed the main force of the German army and various combat materials to be easily transported to the south bank of the Marne River. At the same time, the troops crossing the river also seized the time to build a defensive position and built a fortification on the dilapidated position of the French army that had been destroyed. Due to the limited time, the fortifications built by the German army can only be regarded as simple fortifications, but the various firepower points are still arranged in an orderly manner. Coupled with the powerful artillery support from the rear, if the British and French allied forces want to launch an attack, they will definitely be hit with blood. In addition, if the British and French allied forces launched an offensive at night, it would undoubtedly pose a greater threat to the German army. After all, at that time, the German army was not firmly established, and its combat power could not be fully utilized. But the British and French allied forces gave the German army one night, which enabled the German army to successfully gain a firm foothold on the south bank of the Marne River. At this time, the British and French allied forces launched an offensive, and the consequences can be imagined. At the same time, the German engineers continued to be busy, although normal pontoons are more than enough. But they also need to build a pontoon bridge that can pass through tanks and trucks. In this way, the powerful German armored forces can cross the Marne River and further attack the British and French defense lines. On the morning of April 2nd, most of the German soldiers who had worked hard all night were still resting. In the trenches on the front line, officers and soldiers were lying in disorder. Although the weather is still a bit cold now, the German officers and soldiers who were wearing blankets slept soundly because they were too tired. It's just that at 7 o'clock in the morning, they were woken up by the officers. Everyone get up immediately and prepare to fight. The enemy is about to launch an attack. The officers shouted loudly to wake up the soldiers. The reconnaissance plane of the German Air Force discovered that the British and French allied forces were gathering in large numbers. Obviously, the British and French allied forces were not reconciled to the breakthrough of the defense line and wanted to regain the defense line. Qin Tian immediately ordered that all frontline departments be prepared to resist the counterattack of the British and French allied forces. As long as it succeeds this time, the German army will truly cross the Marne River. It will be impossible for the British and French allied forces to drive the Germans back to the north bank of the Marne. Therefore, Qin Tian and the generals of the German army attached great importance to this battle. Although, after only 2 hours of sleep, many soldiers were not in good spirits. But they were quickly ready for battle. Some people even washed their faces with the cold water of the Marne River to cheer themselves up. Although there are many dead bodies in Marne Hanoi at this moment, no one cares about them at all. The cooking soldiers sent breakfast to the troops on the front line, so that the soldiers could have a full stomach and have the strength to fight against the British and French coalition forces. Quartermasters were also distributing ammunition. It can be foreseen that the battle this time will be very fierce, so when the quartermaster distributed ammunition, he did not forget to provide sufficient ammunition to the frontline troops. Before the offensive of the British and French allied forces began, the German army was already ready to fight. On the positions of the British and French allied forces, the two new forces of the French 8th Army and the 9th Army also entered the battlefield. In addition to the troops drawn from the four frontline armies, for this counterattack, Marshal Zafari invested all his money in it. This undoubtedly shows his determination. At the same time, there is also a sense of desperateness. The cannons are being pushed into the artillery positions. Although the artillery of the four armies on the front line of the British and French allied forces suffered heavy losses under the shelling and bombing of the German army, there are hundreds of remaining cannons in total. Including all the artillery of the French 8th Army and 9th Army, there are more than 2,000 cannons in total. Although this scale cannot be compared with the German army, it is also not weak. General Foch, this time, we invested more than 600,000 people in a counterattack. Can we drive the Germans back to the north bank of the Marne? Marshal Joffre was still a little uncertain about this battle. Although, he believes that with so many troops invested by the British and French allied forces, the Germans will absolutely not be able to resist. However, in this battle, the strength shown by the German army was so strong that he couldn't help feeling a little worried. Your Excellency, Marshal, I have to admit that the Germans are very powerful. They are stronger than they were half a year ago. It was absolutely impossible for the German army half a year ago to cross the Marne River in one day. At the same time, their losses are still very small. This is undoubtedly very unreasonable. Admiral Foch said. Marshal Joffre nodded. The Germans have become bigger and stronger in this war. I have a feeling that, if we fail to defeat the Germans this time, maybe we will never have a chance to defeat them again. General Foch also deeply agrees with this. Germany has already occupied an absolute advantage in this war. Among other things, the disastrous defeat of the Royal Navy alone was enough to give the Germans an advantage in this war. It can be said that, if the German army wins on land again, it will be over for Britain and France. On the contrary, if Britain and France can win, then they still have a chance. At least they can get a relatively decent peace. This shows how much pressure the British and French allied forces have endured in this battle. This is probably why Marshal Joffre rushed to the front from Paris. Your Excellency the President and Your Excellency the Prime Minister both sent telegrams yesterday. They are also paying attention to the Battle of the Marne. Obviously, we are very dissatisfied with letting the Germans cross the Marne on the first day. Your Excellency the President and the Prime Minister both demand we must defeat the Germans in this battle. But what they don't know is that defeating the Germans is not just about talking. We will do our best in this battle. But can we defeat Germany? People, maybe only God knows. Marshal Joffre sighed. Admiral Foch heard the words and didn't know what to say. Even he himself felt a deep powerlessness in this war. It is also hard for him to believe that after half a year, the Germans will become much stronger than before. Not only the strength of firepower, but also the tenacious will to fight. These are all unmatched by the British and French allied forces. No matter what, we will fight to the end. God bless the French Republic. Admiral Foch said. Chapter 499, Guild Wars. At 8 o'clock in the morning on April 2nd, the counterattack of the British and French allied forces finally kicked off. In order to drive the German troops who crossed the Marne River back to the north of the Marne River, the British and French allied forces can be said to have invested their main force in the Marne River defense line. Not only did they mobilize new forces such as the 8th and 9th armies of the French army, but the four armies on the front line also mobilized the main force to launch an attack. In order to win this battle in one fell swoop, order all ministries to launch an attack according to the predetermined plan. Warriors of the French Republic, God bless us, attack. Marshal Joffre gave an order to counterattack in high spirits, although he is personally full of worries about this counterattack. However, in front of other people, he still looks full of confidence, as if only in this way can he infect others. Fire. The artillery commander of the British and French coalition forces gave the order to fire. Boom. 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 more than 2,000 75mm field guns, 105mm howitzers, 83.8mm field guns, and 114mm howitzers on the artillery positions of the British and French Allied forces began to roar and smashed shells one by one at the German army. The positions of the German army on the south bank of the Marne River and the pontoon bridges erected on the surface of the Marne River became the focus of shelling by the British and French Allied forces. The German army's previous strong firepower preparations taught the British and French Allied forces a good lesson. It can be said that the reason why the German army was able to easily cross the Marne River has a great relationship with its strong firepower preparations. Otherwise, the German army would not have crossed the Marne so easily, and at the same time, the casualties would definitely increase exponentially. It is a pity that the British and French Allied forces do not have strong air power and cannot replicate the powerful firepower of the German army. At the same time, once their artillery positions are fired, they will inevitably be suppressed by German firepower. It is precisely because of this that the artillerymen of the British and French coalition forces were ordered to fire as many shells as possible in the shortest possible time. Otherwise, once the German army suppressed them with firepower, they would have no way to continue firing. Boom. 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 Shells fell from the sky one after another and landed on the German positions. After the shell exploded, earth and rocks flew. The German soldiers huddled in the trenches, letting the mud or stones hit their helmets. Because the time was so close, they simply didn't have time to dig the blast holes. Therefore, they could only hide in bunkers such as trenches and endure the fierce shelling of the British and French Allied forces. Boom. A 105mm howitzer shell hits a trench. After the shell exploded, it not only collapsed the trench, but the shrapnel also set off a **** storm inside. Boom. A 114mm howitzer shell fell on the Marne River and hit a pontoon bridge. The wooden pontoon bridge couldn't withstand such a violent explosion at all, and was instantly blown up for a section. The fierce shelling by the British and French Allied forces not only caused the German troops on the front line to suffer huge casualties. At the same time, the pontoon bridges on the Marne River were destroyed one after another. When Qin Tian saw this scene, his face turned livid. Damn, I didn't expect the French to hide so many artillery. It seems that our firepower preparation yesterday was not sufficient. Order the artillery to immediately suppress the artillery of the British and French coalition forces. At the same time, let the Air Force immediately destroy their artillery. Qin Tian ordered. Yes, Your Highness. Major General Manstein immediately went to give the order. In addition, let the engineers get ready to repair the pontoon bridge immediately after the artillery of the British and French coalition forces is suppressed. In any case, the ammunition needs in front must be ensured. Qin Tian continued to order. It can be foreseen that after the fierce shelling by the British and French Allied forces, it was the infantry who launched a large-scale offensive. At that time, the consumption of ammunition on the front line will undoubtedly become very alarming. If the needs of the front line cannot be guaranteed, this will cause great casualties to the German army, and even cause them to be defeated in this battle. Boom. 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 A few minutes later, the German artillery launched a counterattack. Those 150mm heavy howitzers and 105mm howitzers began to suppress the artillery of the British and French Allied forces. As for the 75mm field gun, it is temporarily on standby. Their task is that once the British and French Allied forces invest in infantry to launch an attack, they need to provide fire support for the front line and use powerful artillery fire to kill and injure the vital forces of the British and French Allied forces. The German Air Force also arrived at the battlefield 10 minutes later. Thousands of fighter jets and bombers rushed towards the artillery positions of the British and French Allied forces. Da-da-da. The aviation machine guns of the fighter jets fired, killing the artillerymen. The bombers dropped their bombs directly, leveling the artillery positions. Under the heavy artillery suppression and bombing of the German army, the artillery losses of the British and French Allied forces began to soar. Artillery positions one after another were destroyed by the Germans. The pressure on the frontline German troops also began to decrease. Your Excellency, Marshal, the Germans counterattacked very violently. They dispatched a large number of fighter planes to deal with us. Our artillery suffered heavy casualties. An artillery general reported to Marshal Joffre. Marshal Joffre looked at the German fighter planes circling in the sky. His eyes were full of hatred. Indeed, in this battle, the German aircraft caused great losses to the British and French allied forces. If it weren't for these fighters, they might not be in such a mess. Order the artillery to hold on. 20 minutes later, the infantry will attack. Marshal Joffre ordered. Yes, Marshal. Although it only lasted 20 minutes, it was a complete torment for the artillery of the British and French allied forces. They can only pray to God and pray that the German shells or bombs will not fall on their heads. Otherwise, there is only a dead end. 20 minutes passed quickly. It took only an hour from when they fired their guns to when they withdrew from their positions. However, the British and French allied forces lost more than half of their artillery. There are no more than 1,000 cannons of various calibers remaining. The number seems to be quite a lot, but if it is scattered over a defense line of hundreds of kilometers, it is undoubtedly nothing at all. Come on. After the bombardment by the British and French allied forces ended, the infantry who had already been prepared jumped out of their positions and attacked the German defense line hundreds of meters away. Countless soldiers of the British and French allied forces ran forward desperately, holding rifles and shouting slogans. The order they received was to rush into the German defense line in the shortest possible time. Otherwise, what awaits them is the slaughter of the German army's intensive firepower. Chapter 500, Mountain of Corpses and Sea of Blood. Get into position and prepare to fight. The officers on the German front line shouted loudly. Countless British and French allied forces began to attack, which undoubtedly brought great pressure to the German troops on the front line. However, they were not intimidated by it. Yesterday, facing the powerful firepower of the British and French allied forces, they were able to launch an offensive and defeated the British and French allied forces in one fell swoop. Not to mention now, they are defending, and the British and French allied forces are attacking. Machine gunners are ready. Put them closer before firing. Let the British and French allied forces have a good taste of our powerful firepower. A series of general-purpose machine guns and squad machine guns have been erected on the trenches. The long ammunition chain extends all the way into the ammunition box. Fire. On the artillery position behind the German army, the muzzles of the 75mm field guns have been raised. With the commander's order, the 75mm field started guns shelling. The dense shells roared and smashed at the soldiers of the British and French coalition forces who were attacking, like raindrops falling from the sky. Boom. 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 Intensive explosions sounded in the queue of the British and French coalition forces, and shrapnel shot out, easily harvesting the lives of the soldiers of the British and French coalition forces. The airwave from the explosion of the shell even swept many people directly into the sky. At this moment, the human body appears so fragile. The German army used more than 2,000 75mm field guns to open fire on the British and French allied forces. The powerful shelling directly caused the attacking British and French allied forces to pay a great price. I don't know how many soldiers of the British and French allied forces fell on the way to attack and were torn to pieces. However, the British and French allied forces used a large number of troops to launch an offensive, which enabled them to hold on even in the face of heavy German shelling. But their morale inevitably began to drain. Marshal, the German artillery fire was too fierce, and the attacking troops suffered a lot of losses. Admiral Foch said. Marshal Joffre nodded. If we can win this battle, our army must also carry out reforms. Strengthen the artillery and machine gun firepower of the troops. The strength of the troops is no longer the only factor that determines the outcome of the battlefield. General Foch nodded, but it is undoubtedly very difficult for them to defeat the German army and win this time. Perhaps, what awaits them is another failure. Boom. 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 The mortars and grenades on the German front line also started firing, and more dense shells and grenades fell into the queue of the British and French allied forces, further increasing their casualties. Although, the power of mortars and grenades is not great, but dealing with ordinary soldiers, there is still no problem. The explosion of a shell can often take the lives of several soldiers. Damn it, how many artillery pieces did the Germans have? Do they want to wipe us all out with these bombardments? A French officer cursed. However, in the face of the fierce German shelling, they still had no choice but to bite the bullet and continue to attack. Da da da. The machine guns on the German positions also began to fire, and the intensive firepower immediately dealt a greater blow to the attacking British and French allied forces. The German troops are equipped with machine guns with significantly higher firepower than the British and French allied forces. At the same time, the rate of fire of the machine gun is also faster. The crossfire formed by these machine guns directly blocked the attack direction of the British and French allied forces. Countless soldiers of the British and French coalition forces were directly blocked there, as if they had hit an invisible wall, and their heads were broken. A large number of soldiers, hit by machine gun bullets, fell to the ground screaming. Their corpses were piled on the ground layer upon layer, and blood flowed from these corpses, soaking the soil. A machine gunner of the German army numbly pulled the trigger. A belt with 250 rounds of bullets was shot out in less than half a minute. The deputy shooter immediately replaced the ammunition belt, so that the machine gun could continue shooting. The whole process was smooth, and it only took a few seconds. This allowed the German machine guns to form almost uninterrupted powerful firepower, and this naturally caused great casualties to the British and French allied forces. Mortar? What about the 10,000 square meter mortar? Kill the German heavy machine guns, otherwise we will be suppressed here forever. A British officer shouted loudly, but the next second, a mortar shell exploded beside him, tearing the British officer to pieces. What should we do if the officer is dead? A group of British soldiers suddenly didn't know what to do. If they could, they would definitely choose to run away immediately, escaping from this battlefield like sure as hell. However, retreating without an order is tantamount to desertion. What awaits them is a trial by a military court, and they may even lose their lives. This allowed these British soldiers to bite the bullet and continue to attack behind other troops. A general-purpose machine gun and a squad machine gun of the German army formed a crossfire. British and French soldiers who attacked here have already paid an extremely heavy price, but they still have nothing to do with it. A few minutes later, a mortar moved up, and the gunner was ready to fire, after aiming at the target. But the German machine gunners also seemed to be aware of the threat, and immediately turned their guns, and fired at the enemy. The gunners of the British and French allied forces were sieved before even the shells could be put into the mortar. Another British-French soldier tried to pick up the shell, and put it into the barrel. Snapped. A clear gunshot sounded, and the soldier's neck had been knocked off, and blood was oozing out. After changing several people in a row, the coalition mortar successfully fired. Perhaps because of their better luck, the first shot of this mortar destroyed a general-purpose machine gun of the German army, not only blowing the machine gun into parts. At the same time, the machine gunner was also killed. Good job. Attack immediately, and break through the German defense line. A British officer ordered loudly, but in less than a minute, another machine gun started firing. The dense bullets shot over, directly causing the soldiers of the British and French coalition forces to fall to the ground like cutting wheat. The rest of the coalition soldiers also had to lie on the ground, not daring to raise their heads. The bullets flew over their heads with a whoosh, whoosh, making people's scalp numb, for fear of being hit by bullets. Although the British and French allied forces organized a powerful offensive, they were still smashed in front of the solid German defense line. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.